After my millionaire grandfather died and left me everything, my cheating ex-wife, who left me for her new lover, tried to sue me for the money. When I walked into the courtroom, my ex-wife rolled her eyes, but the judge froze. "Wait, the charges are against you," he said. "They never knew who I really was. Look, I've seen some ridiculous things in my 34 years on this planet. I've watched a guy try to microwave a burrito still wrapped in aluminum foil. I've witnessed someone parallel park for 20 minutes only to give up and take an Uber, and I once saw my college roommate attempt to iron a shirt while wearing it. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the moment I walked into Courtroom 3B of the Philadelphia County Courthouse and locked eyes with my ex-wife, Miranda. The eye roll she gave me wasn't just some casual, ugh, Monday morning kind of deal. No, this was a full-body experience. Her eyes didn't just roll. They did a complete gymnastics routine, stuck the landing, and probably pulled a muscle on the way back down. I'm talking Olympic-level disdain here, folks. The kind of eye roll that comes with its own dramatic soundtrack and slow-motion replay. For a split second, I genuinely thought she might injure herself, like she'd somehow sprain a cornea or detach a retina from the sheer force of her contempt. Honestly, I almost started a slow clap right there in the middle of the courtroom. It was that impressive. She was sitting at the plaintiff's table, all dolled up in some power suit that probably cost more than my first car, her perfectly highlighted hair cascading over her shoulders like she was posing for a LinkedIn headshot. Next to her sat Trent. Yes, that Trent, the gym instructor with the IQ of a protein shake, looking like he'd borrowed his suit from his older brother's bar mitzvah circa 2007. The guy had so much hair gel in that you could probably see his reflection from space, and he was doing that thing where he flexed his jaw muscles to look intimidating. Spoiler alert, it wasn't working. But here's where it gets good. Judge Harold Reynolds, a man who'd been presiding over family court cases since before I was born, looked up from the case file on his bench. He adjusted his glasses, squinted at the papers, then looked directly at me standing there in my only decent suit, the one I'd bought specifically for Grandpa Henry's funeral 3 months ago. The judge blinked once, then twice, like his brain was trying to reboot after encountering a critical error. His mouth opened slightly, closed, then opened again, and I swear I could actually hear the Windows shutdown sound playing in his head. "Wait a minute," Judge Reynolds said slowly, his voice carrying that particular tone of confusion mixed with growing amusement. "The charges here, these allegations, they're against you?" He glanced down at the file again, flipped a page like maybe he'd missed something crucial, then looked back up at me with the expression of a man who'd just realized the punchline to a joke he'd heard 3 days ago. "Marcus Whitmore, you're the defendant they're claiming manipulated and exploited an elderly man." I couldn't help it. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "That would be me, Your Honor." The thing is, Miranda thought she had this whole situation figured out. She'd done the math in her pretty little head, probably while getting a pedicure or doing hot yoga or whatever it is people do when they have too much time and too little self-awareness. In her version of reality, she was suing her broke ex-husband, the guy who used to fix air conditioning units and unclog toilets for a living, the maintenance engineer, as I generously called myself, for what she believed was her rightful share of my late grandfather's estate. She'd probably pictured me still living in that crappy studio apartment in South Philly, still driving my 2003 Honda Civic with the duct-taped passenger mirror, still microwaving ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week. What she didn't know, what her smug lawyer Richard Pike apparently failed to properly investigate, and what was about to make this the most entertaining morning I'd had in years, was that the maintenance engineer she'd divorced 3 years ago, the guy she'd left with nothing but a sticky note and a half-empty apartment, was now the sole heir to a $30 million estate. Yeah, you read that right. $30 million. With an M. The kind of money that has accountants, investment portfolios, and causes distant relatives you've never met to suddenly remember your birthday. My grandfather, Henry Whitmore, had been a Philadelphia legend. Retired Superior Court judge, real estate mogul, the guy who owned half the commercial properties in Center City and had more connections than Verizon. He was the kind of man who wore 3-piece suits to breakfast, read 3 newspapers before lunch, and could make grown lawyers cry during cross-examination. And he was the only person in my entire life who'd ever told me something that actually stuck. "Son, keep receipts on everyone who betrays you. Not for revenge, For clarity. Smart man. Scary smart. The kind of smart that makes you nervous until you realize he's on your side. So there I stood, in this wood-paneled courtroom that smelled like old law books and broken dreams, watching my ex-wife's carefully constructed fantasy start to crumble before her eyes. I could see her lawyer frantically whispering something to her, probably trying to figure out why the judge was looking at the case file like it was written in invisible ink. Miranda's perfectly painted face had gone from smugly confident to slightly concerned, her Instagram-ready smile starting to crack around the edges. And Trent? Poor, dumb Trent was just sitting there looking confused, which to be fair was pretty much his default setting. The guy probably thought estate meant a type of car. I leaned slightly toward my own attorney, Lucas Shaw, a sharp guy who charged by the hour and was worth every penny, and caught Miranda's eye across the courtroom. She was staring at me now, and I could literally see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out why I looked so calm, why I wasn't sweating, why I seemed almost amused. That's when I couldn't resist. I gave her my best smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach your eyes, and then I shifted my gaze to Trent. He was adjusting his too-tight collar, his tan looking especially orange under the fluorescent courtroom lights. I leaned just a little bit closer to Lucas, but kept my voice just loud enough to carry across the aisle. Nice suit, Trent, I said conversationally. Really brings out your ambition. Quick question though, did she pay for that? Or did you manage to buy it with my alimony money? The effect was instantaneous and beautiful. Trent's face went from spray tan orange to something resembling a sunburned tomato. His jaw clenched, and he half stood from his chair before Miranda grabbed his arm and yanked him back down, hissing something that I'm pretty sure wasn't courtroom appropriate. Her lawyer shot me a death glare that could have melted steel. But Judge Reynolds? Oh man, Judge Reynolds tried to hide it. He really did. He coughed into his hand, turning slightly away from the courtroom, his shoulders shaking just a little bit. When he turned back, he was wearing that expression judges wear when they're trying very hard to maintain professional decorum while internally dying of laughter. Mr. Whitmore, the judge said, his voice carefully controlled. Perhaps we should begin these proceedings with a bit more decorum. Of course, Your Honor, I replied, keeping my face perfectly innocent. My apologies. I'm just excited to be here. Lucas elbowed me gently in the ribs, but I could see him fighting back a smile too. Miranda's lawyer cleared his throat, loudly and importantly, like he was about to deliver the Gettysburg Address. Your Honor, if we could proceed with the preliminary. Oh, we'll proceed, Judge Reynolds interrupted, leafing through the case file again. But I have to say, Mr. Pike, this is one of the more interesting cases I've seen cross my bench in quite some time. And I've been doing this for 27 years. That's when I knew. That's when I absolutely, definitely knew that today was going to be a beautiful day in court. The kind of day you tell stories about later, the kind that makes you believe in karma and cosmic justice, and all those things people post inspirational quotes about on Facebook. Miranda was still staring at me, her eye makeup starting to look a little less perfect, a tiny furrow appearing between her perfectly microbladed eyebrows. I could practically hear her internal monologue. Why isn't he scared? Why isn't he panicking? What does he know that I don't? Everything, sweetheart. I know everything. And as the bailiff called the court to order and Judge Reynolds prepared to officially begin proceedings, I settled into my chair, crossed my legs comfortably, and prepared to watch the show. Because that's what this was going to be, a show. And unlike the past 3 years of my life, for once I wasn't the one being played. I was about to get my favorite kind of justice, the legal kind, served with a side of poetic irony and garnished with just a hint of "I told you so." It was going to be a very good day indeed. Okay, so before we get back to watching Miranda's world implode in that courtroom, we need to rewind the tape a bit. Because you can't fully appreciate the sweet, sweet irony of this situation without understanding how I ended up sitting on a $30 million fortune in the first place. Trust me, this backstory is worth it. It's got everything. Family drama, unexpected plot twists, and a funeral that looked like someone had accidentally sent invitations to the entire Eastern Seaboard power structure. 3 months before that beautiful courtroom showdown, my grandfather, Henry Whitmore, passed away in his sleep at the ripe old age of 87. And when I say he was sharp until the end, I mean the man could have out-negotiated a used car salesman while simultaneously solving a crossword puzzle and critiquing your life choices. 2 days before he died, he called me to discuss municipal bond yields and to tell me that my haircut made me look like I was auditioning for a boy band. That was Grandpa Henry, brutally honest, scary intelligent, and somehow both your biggest critic and your fiercest defender at the same time. The funeral was absolutely insane. I'm talking about a who's who of Philadelphia society, and honestly, half of Pennsylvania's political infrastructure. There were 3 state senators, 2 congressmen, at least a dozen Superior Court judges, all of whom looked genuinely sad, which tells you something about how respected he was. A collection of CEOs who probably had a combined net worth that could buy a small country, and enough lawyers to staff every firm from here to Pittsburgh. The parking lot at the church looked like a luxury car dealership having a convention. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, and one absolutely ridiculous Bentley that belonged to some real estate developer who Grandpa had apparently destroyed in court back in the 90s, but who showed up anyway to pay respects because that's just the kind of legend Henry Whitmore was. Me? I stood there in my funeral suit, the same one I was wearing in that courtroom, by the way, because I'm practical like that, shaking hands with people who kept saying things like, "Your grandfather was an extraordinary man, and he spoke so highly of you, and you must be so proud to carry on his legacy." And I was proud, genuinely, completely proud, because unlike most of the people in that church, I actually knew him. Not the legend, not the retired judge, not the real estate mogul. I knew Henry, the guy who taught me to play chess when I was 7, who let me stay up late watching old westerns, who told me that integrity was the only currency that actually mattered in life. You know who wasn't there? Miranda. Obviously. She was probably somewhere tropical at that exact moment, posting Instagram stories about living her truth and doing yoga on a beach with Trent, who was undoubtedly wearing one of those tank tops that's cut so low you can practically see his belly button. She'd never met Grandpa Henry. Not once in our entire 5-year marriage. And that wasn't an accident. That was a choice. Her choice, specifically. See, Miranda had always been too busy for family stuff. My family stuff, anyway. Her own family gatherings? Those were non-negotiable. But when I'd invite her to Sunday dinners at Grandpa's house, suddenly she had a headache, or a work thing, or a friend's crisis that required immediate attention. After about the 10th excuse, Grandpa had looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Son, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. You're currently on showing number 10. I'd laughed it off back then, made excuses for her, said she was just stressed with work. Grandpa had just shrugged and gone back to his newspaper, but I caught the look in his eye. He knew. He always knew. After the funeral service, after the burial, after the endless reception where I ate approximately 17 of those tiny sandwiches that taste like nothing but somehow cost a fortune, I sat down in the office of Bernard Castellano, Grandpa's attorney for the past 40 years. Bernie was old-school Philadelphia legal establishment, 3-piece suit, pocket watch, the whole 9 yards. The kind of guy who still used a fountain pen and probably had strong opinions about proper shoe-shining technique. I figured this would be quick. Maybe Grandpa had left me his chess set, the one we'd played on every Sunday for 20 years. Maybe his collection of vintage watches, or his law books, or perhaps that ridiculous painting of a ship that hung in his study that he'd always joked would be mine someday. Sentimental stuff. Meaningful, but not life-changing. Bernie slid a folder across his mahogany desk, the kind that's so polished you can see your reflection in it, and said with absolutely no preamble whatsoever, "Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore. You now own everything." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "Everything," Bernie repeated, tapping the folder. "The house, the properties, the investment portfolio, the savings accounts, the stocks, the bonds, the whole estate. Your grandfather left it all to you. Total liquid and fixed assets come to approximately $30 million, give or take, depending on the market. There are some smaller bequests to charities and his housekeeper, but the bulk of the estate, we're talking about 97% of it, goes to you." For a solid 10 seconds, I just stared at him. My brain had completely blue-screened. $30 million. $30 million. That's the kind of money where you stop checking price tags at the grocery store. That's accidentally leave a $100 bill in your jeans and forget about it money. That's your great-great-grandkids will still be arguing about it money. That's, I don't why. I finally managed to stammer out, which was super articulate of me. Bernie smiled, the the kind of smile that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment and was thoroughly enjoying it. He opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten letter. I recognized Grandpa's distinctive scrawl immediately, all sharp angles and confident strokes. "He wanted you to read this," Bernie said, handing it over. My hands were actually shaking as I unfolded the letter. Grandpa's handwriting, still steady even at 87, filled the page. "Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Don't be sad. 87 years is a damn good run, and I got to see you become the man I always knew you could be. Here's the thing, son, you earned this inheritance. Not by being born into the family, not by sucking up to me, not by showing up at the end with flowers and fake tears. You earned it by having backbone. You showed up every Sunday for 20 years, even when you had better things to do. You called me every Wednesday evening, even when I know you were exhausted from work. You sat with me in the hospital during that pneumonia scare 3 years ago, and you never once asked about my will or my money. You came because you cared, and that's rarer than you think. Everyone else in this family sees me as a bank account with a pulse. You saw me as Henry. That's worth more than all the money I made in my entire life. So here's your inheritance. Everything I built, everything I saved, everything I invested. Use it wisely. Use it well. And remember who showed up when everyone else left. That matters. That's the real currency. Love, Grandpa." I had to set the letter down because my vision had gone blurry and I absolutely was not crying in front of Bernie Castellano. I was just having an allergic reaction to the leather chairs or something. Totally normal. Bernie, bless him, pretended to be very interested in organizing papers while I pulled myself together. When I finally looked up, he was holding out a glass of whiskey. The good stuff, probably older than I was. "Your grandfather left me specific instructions to give you this the moment after you read the letter," Bernie said. "He said you'd need it." I took the glass and downed it in one go. It burned in the best possible way. "So what now?" I asked, my voice only slightly hoarse. Bernie leaned back in his chair. "Now? Now you're a very wealthy man, Marcus. You'll need to make some decisions about the properties, the investments, the foundation he'd been running. But that can wait. For now, just let it sink in. Let it sink in. Right. I was a millionaire. Multiple times over. Me, Marcus Whitmore, the guy who'd been eating cereal for dinner twice a week just 6 months ago because it was cheap and easy. The maintenance engineer who'd spent 5 years being told by his wife that he'd never amount to anything special. The grandson who just showed up because that's what you do for people you love. I drove home that night in my beat-up Honda Civic, which suddenly felt extremely ironic, and sat in my crappy studio apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like Abraham Lincoln, and I laughed. I laughed until my sides hurt, until tears were streaming down my face, until my neighbor banged on the wall and yelled at me to keep it down. Because if only Grandpa Henry knew how absolutely, devastatingly perfect his timing was. If only he could see what was coming in 3 months. If only he knew that his letter, that beautiful, perfect letter about showing up and having backbone, would be the most prophetic thing he'd ever written. The universe has a sense of humor after all, and apparently it was on my side for once. So there I was, 30 days into being secretly rich, and let me tell you, it's a weird experience. I hadn't told anyone yet, not my coworkers, not my neighbors, definitely not the barista at the coffee shop who still gave me the struggling millennial discount without me asking. I was still living in my studio apartment with Abraham Lincoln on the ceiling, still driving my Honda with the janky side mirror, still buying the store brand everything at the grocery store because old habits die hard, and also because I genuinely couldn't process that I could now afford name brand cereal without checking my bank account first. Bernie had advised me to take it slow, figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Now that money wasn't a constant source of anxiety. So I kept going to work, kept fixing HVAC units and unclogging toilets, kept living my regular life, while sitting on a fortune that would make most people's heads explode. It was kind of fun, actually, like being a superhero with a secret identity, except instead of fighting crime, I was just really good at replacing water heaters. I was in the middle of eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container, living that glamorous millionaire lifestyle, obviously, when my phone rang. Lucas Shaw's name popped up on the screen, and I answered with my mouth full of lo mein because I'm classy like that. "Marcus," Lucas said, and his tone made me stop chewing immediately. He sounded somewhere between amused and concerned. which is a very specific lawyer tone that usually means someone's done something spectacularly stupid. I need you to sit down. I'm already sitting, I said, swallowing quickly. What's wrong? Is it the estate? Did something happen with the properties? No, nothing like that. The estate is fine. It's just... He paused, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. I got served this morning with a lawsuit. Against you. I almost dropped my phone into my lo mein. What? Who's suing me? For what? Your ex-wife. Time stopped. I mean, not literally, but you know that feeling when your brain just completely freezes and you can't process words anymore? Yeah, that happened. I sat there holding my phone, a noodle hanging from my chopsticks, my mouth opening and closing like a goldfish that had suddenly developed existential dread. I'm sorry, I finally managed. Did you just say Miranda is suing me? Miranda Coleman? My ex-wife Miranda? The woman who left me 3 years ago for a guy whose entire personality is protein powder. That's the one, Lucas confirmed, and I could hear the barely suppressed amusement in his voice. And wait, it gets better. She's suing you for fraud, undue influence, and elder exploitation. What? I actually shouted that, and my neighbor banged on the wall again. I lowered my voice to an aggressive whisper. For what? Fraud. What could I have possibly defrauded her of? Her Netflix password? Because she changed that when she left, so that ship has sailed. Lucas was definitely laughing now. She and Mr. Trent Davis are claiming that you manipulated your grandfather, Henry Whitmore, into leaving you his entire estate. They're alleging that you isolated him from his family, took advantage of his advanced age and supposedly declining mental faculties, and essentially conned an elderly man out of $30 million. I sat there in stunned silence for a solid 15 seconds. Then I started laughing. Not a normal laugh, a hysterical, borderline unhinged laugh that probably confirmed to my neighbors that I'd finally lost it. Let me get this straight, I said when I could finally breathe again. Miranda, who never met my grandfather, who refused to attend a single family dinner in 5 years of marriage, who couldn't even be bothered to send a sympathy card when he died, is now claiming that I isolated him from his family. That appears to be the crux of their argument, yes. His family? What family? Grandpa hadn't spoken to anyone except me since like 2001 because everyone else bored him to tears. His own son, my dad, moved to Arizona and calls once a year on Christmas. His brother died in 1998. Who exactly am I supposed to have isolated him from? The mailman. I'm just reading what the complaint says, Marcus. And Trent? Trent is involved in this. The guy who thinks estate is a type of car is filing a lawsuit about estate law. He's listed as a co-plaintiff. Apparently they're engaged now, so he's claiming some kind of... Honestly, I'm not even sure what he's claiming. The legal argument is pretty thin. Actually, calling it thin is generous. It's basically transparent. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to process this absolute insanity. When did she file this? It's dated 3 days ago. I got served this morning. 3 days ago, I repeated slowly. Lucas, 3 days ago Miranda posted on Instagram about new beginnings with the love of my life. I know because my cousin sent me a screenshot with like 15 laughing emojis. She posted a picture of her and Trent on a boat with champagne, with some caption about manifestation and living her best life. So she filed a lawsuit claiming emotional damages and family trauma the same week she posted vacation photos, Lucas said dryly. That's certainly a choice. That's not a choice. That's evidence of a complete break from reality. I stood up, started pacing my tiny apartment, which took approximately 4 steps in any direction. How did she even find out about the inheritance? Public records, probably. Estate filings are publicly accessible, and your grandfather's passing made the papers. Once his will went through probate, anyone could look it up if they knew where to look. So she went digging. Appears that way. I laughed again, but this time it was the cold kind, the kind that comes when you realize someone you used to love has turned into someone you don't even recognize. She left me when I had nothing. Literally nothing. She walked out with a sticky note, Lucas. A sticky note that said, "You're a good man, but I need passion." Now suddenly she finds out I inherited money, and she's what? Crawling back? Filing lawsuits? What's her endgame here? Best guess? She either wants a settlement to go away quietly, or she actually thinks she can convince a judge that she's entitled to a portion of your inheritance. Based on what legal principle? The I regret my life choices clause. I've seen people try to win cases on less, Lucas admitted. But Marcus, between you and me, this is a garbage lawsuit. It's going to get tossed. She has no standing, no evidence, and from what you've told me about your relationship with your grandfather, she has absolutely no case whatsoever. So why is she doing this? Because people get weird about money, especially large amounts of money, and especially when they feel like they somehow deserve it. I thought about that for a moment, about Miranda sitting in whatever overpriced apartment she and Trent were renting, scrolling through public records, seeing those numbers, doing the math, realizing that if she'd stuck around just a little bit longer, if she'd faked interest in my family for just a few more years, she could have been sitting on millions instead of splitting rent with a guy whose career peaked at fitness boot camp instructor. When's the first hearing? I asked. 2 weeks. Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. Judge Harold Reynolds presiding. Reynolds? I know that name. Wasn't he friends with Grandpa? Colleagues, yes. They served on the bench together back in the 90s. I already checked. He doesn't have to recuse himself since he's not personally involved in the estate, but he definitely knew your grandfather professionally. A slow smile spread across my face. So Miranda is going to stand in front of a judge who actually knew Henry Whitmore and try to claim that I manipulated him? That does appear to be her strategy, yes. Lucas, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I once watched Trent try to open a door that clearly said pull for a full minute. Lucas laughed. I'm not worried about the case, Marcus. It's frivolous, and any competent judge will see that immediately. I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is happening, and to prepare yourself for seeing her in court. Oh, I'm prepared, I said, and I meant it. Trust me, I'm very prepared. After I hung up, I sat back down on my couch and finished my lo mein, which had gone cold, but I ate it anyway, because wasting food is a sin, and also I was too distracted to care. I thought about Miranda and Trent, probably celebrating right now, probably convinced they'd found some brilliant loophole, some way to cash in on my good fortune. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Grandpa Henry had prepared me for exactly this kind of situation. He'd warned me about people who only show up when there's something in it for them. He'd taught me to document everything, to keep records, to never assume that people wouldn't surprise you with their greed. I walked over to my closet and pulled out a box I'd been keeping since the divorce. Inside were 3 years' worth of receipts, text messages I'd backed up, emails, calendar entries. Every time Miranda had canceled on a family dinner, every excuse she'd made, every time she'd asked Grandpa for money and then ghosted him when he said no. Every screenshot of every social media post she'd made while claiming to be too overwhelmed to meet my family. Grandpa had told me, keep receipts on everyone who betrays you. Well, Miranda, I thought, setting the box on my kitchen counter. I kept every single one. 2 weeks suddenly felt very, very far away. All right, so before we get to the absolute massacre that was about to happen in that courtroom, I need to give you the full backstory on my marriage to Miranda. Because you can't truly appreciate the poetic justice of what's coming without understanding just how spectacularly she played herself. And trust me, this woman wrote, directed, and starred in her own downfall, and she doesn't even know the final act yet. I met Miranda Coleman 7 years ago at a coffee shop in Rittenhouse Square, back when I was still trying to convince myself that my computer repair business was going to take off any day now. Spoiler alert, it did not take off. In fact, it crashed and burned so hard I'm pretty sure the wreckage is still smoking somewhere. But anyway, I was sitting there with my laptop, trying to figure out why Mrs. Henderson's desktop kept blue screening, when this absolutely gorgeous woman sat down at the table next to me and ordered something complicated involving oat milk and 3 different syrups. She had that look, you know the one, where everything about her screamed, I'm low maintenance, but you could tell she spent 2 hours getting ready. The messy bun that took 15 minutes to perfect, the natural makeup that required 12 products, the yoga pants that cost more than my rent. But she smiled at me, commented on my vintage Phillies t-shirt, and somehow we ended up talking for 3 hours about absolutely nothing important. I love that you're so passionate about helping people with their technology problems, she'd said, tilting her head in that way that probably worked on every guy she'd ever met. It's so humble. You have such a beautiful, grounded spirit. Humble. Grounded. Looking back, those were red flags bigger than the ones they fly at the beach when there's a hurricane coming. But I was 27 and stupid, and she was paying attention to me. So I ignored every single warning sign my brain tried to send. Translation of what she actually meant. I think you're a broke loser who will be easy to control and won't question me when I max out your credit cards. We dated for 6 months before I proposed, because apparently I was speedrunning bad decisions that year. The wedding was small, my family, her family, a few friends, and about 40 people on her side that I'd never met and would never see again. Grandpa Henry came, wore his best suit, shook my hand, and pulled me aside before the ceremony. "Son," he said quietly, "are you absolutely sure about this?" "Of course," I'd said, confused. "I love her, Grandpa." He'd looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. Love is important, but pay attention to how someone treats people who can't do anything for them. That tells you who they really are. I'd laughed it off, told him he was being overprotective, promised him he'd love Miranda once he got to know her better. He'd just nodded, kissed me on the forehead like he used to when I was a kid, and said, "I hope you're right." Narrator voice, I was not right. The first year of marriage was fine, or at least I thought it was fine, which in retrospect means it definitely wasn't fine and I was just oblivious. Miranda worked as a social media consultant, which as far as I could tell meant she took selfies and called it market research. I was still doing computer repair and had just picked up some maintenance work on the side to make ends meet. Because surprise, fixing computers for old people who keep clicking on email scams doesn't actually pay very well. But Miranda had expensive taste. Designer purses, premium gym memberships, monthly spa appointments, a skincare routine that required more products than a CVS checkout line. And somehow, despite her consulting business, I was the one paying for all of it. "Babe, I need this moisturizer," she'd say, holding up a tiny jar that cost $140. "It's an investment in my skin health." "That's like a week of groceries," I'd point out. "Don't be cheap, Marcus. Self-care isn't selfish." Right. Self-care. That's what we were calling burning through my paycheck before the bills were paid. Every Sunday, I'd go to Grandpa's house for dinner. It was our thing, had been since I was a teenager. We'd play chess, argue about politics, watch whatever game was on, just hang out. And every Sunday, I'd invite Miranda. "I can't this week, babe. I have a headache." I promised Chloe I'd help her with something. "I'm so stressed with work, I just need to decompress." "Your grandfather is kind of intimidating, you know? I just need more time." Excuse after excuse after excuse. For 5 years, she came to maybe 3 Sunday dinners total, and 2 of those were Christmas and Thanksgiving when she basically had no choice. She never called him, never asked about him, acted like my family was some kind of inconvenient obligation that interfered with her real life. Meanwhile, she expected me to attend every single one of her family events. Her mom's birthday, her dad's retirement party, her cousin's baby shower, her aunt's book club. I showed up to all of them, smiled, made small talk, pretended I enjoyed listening to her mother explain for the 15th time how Miranda could have been a model if she'd wanted to. Year 3 was when Trent entered the picture, though I didn't know it at the time. Miranda suddenly needed a gym membership to the fanciest fitness center in Philadelphia, the kind where they have eucalyptus-scented towels and water with cucumber slices. She started going every morning at 6 a.m., which should have been my first clue because Miranda had never voluntarily woken up before 9 in her entire life. "I'm just really getting into fitness," she'd say, wearing matching workout sets that cost more than my car payment. "It's important to prioritize health." She started talking about this amazing trainer who was really helping her reach her goals. "Trent this, Trent that. Trent says high-intensity intervals are the key to metabolic health. Trent recommended this protein powder. Trent thinks I should try hot yoga." I'm not an idiot. I mean, clearly I was a bit of an idiot or I would have seen this coming. But even I started to notice that she was spending more time talking about her trainer than she was talking to me. She'd come home from the gym all energized and glowing, then barely acknowledge me for the rest of the day. "Maybe you should work out with us sometime," she suggested once, which was hilarious because I was working 60-hour weeks fixing air conditioners and hauling equipment upstairs. I was getting plenty of exercise, thanks. "I'm good," I'd said. "But maybe you could skip one session and come to Grandpa's for dinner this week. He's been asking about you." She'd rolled her eyes, practice for the Olympic-level performance she'd given the Courtroom 3 years later, and said, "Marcus, your grandfather barely knows I exist. Stop trying to guilt-trip me." That stung. mainly because it was partially true. Grandpa barely knew she existed because she'd never given him the chance to know her. Year 4 was when things really started falling apart. Miranda's consulting business somehow required more and more funding but produced fewer and fewer results. She needed a new laptop, a ring light, a professional camera, editing software, a website, business cards made from recycled bamboo, or some nonsense. I was paying for everything, working 2 jobs, exhausted all the time, while she posted Instagram stories about building her empire and manifesting abundance. Meanwhile, my relationship with Grandpa was the only thing keeping me sane. Every Sunday, without fail, I'd show up. Sometimes I'd be so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but I'd go anyway because that's what you do for people you love. We'd play chess. He won probably 70% of the time, and he'd ask me how I was really doing, not the polite version, but the truth. Marriage is hard, I'd admit sometimes, but we're working on it. He'd nod, move his knight, and say something like, "Son, you can't work on a marriage alone. Takes 2 people showing up." I'd deflect, make excuses, change the subject. But he was right. He was always right. Year 5, Miranda's best friend, Chloe, let something slip at a barbecue. We were all a few drinks in, and she made a comment about how it must be nice that Miranda's finally found someone who matches her energy. "What do you mean?" I'd asked. Chloe's face had gone white. "Oh, I just meant, with her fitness journey and everything." But I knew. In that moment, I absolutely knew. All those early morning gym sessions, all that talk about Trent, all the time she'd come home late because she lost track of time doing cardio. It wasn't cardio. Well, technically maybe it was, but not the kind that happens on a treadmill. I didn't confront her right away. I watched, paid attention, noticed things I'd been ignoring. The way she hit her phone screen. The way she'd smile at texts and then quickly delete them. The new lingerie that I never saw her wear around me. The excuses about being tired whenever I tried to initiate anything physical. One morning, I woke up to find a sticky note on the bathroom mirror. Not even a real conversation, not even the decency of a face-to-face breakup. Just a yellow post-it note stuck next to the toothpaste holder. "Marcus, you're a good man, but I need passion. I need someone who understands me on a deeper level. I'm moving out today while you're at work. I hope you find happiness. M." That was it. 5 years of marriage, summarized in 4 sentences on a 3-inch square of paper. No explanation, no apology, nothing about the 5 years I'd supported her dreams while mine died on the vine. Nothing about the credit card debt she'd left me with. Nothing about the fact that she'd been cheating on me for at least a year. I called Grandpa. Didn't even say hello, just she left. "I'm sorry, son," he said quietly. "Come over. Bring whatever you need." I stayed with him for 2 months while I got myself together, found a new apartment, started rebuilding my life. He never said, "I told you so." Never lectured me. Just let me heal and told me the same thing over and over. Don't chase people who run towards stupidity. Best advice I ever got. And now, 3 years later, here we were. Miranda had chosen Trent, chosen his abs over my reliability, chosen passion over partnership. And I'd chosen to move forward, to keep showing up for the people who mattered, to maintain my integrity even when it would have been easier to become bitter. The universe was about to reward one of those choices and punish the other. Karma, as it turns out, has perfect timing. So there we were, back in Courtroom 3B, and let me tell you, the energy in that room was absolutely electric. You know that feeling you get right before something spectacular is about to happen? Like when you're watching a cooking competition and someone's souffle is clearly about to collapse. Or when you see someone confidently walking toward a glass door they think is open. That beautiful moment of anticipation before disaster strikes. Yeah, that's exactly what this felt like, except I was the only one who knew the disaster was coming. Miranda and Trent sat at the plaintiff's table looking like they'd just won the lottery and were waiting for someone to hand them the oversized check. Miranda had gone full power woman. With her outfit, a navy pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, hair blown out to perfection, makeup applied with the precision of someone who'd watched approximately 400 YouTube tutorials. She looked like she was about to give a TED Talk on manifesting success through positive vibrations or whatever nonsense she was into these days. Trent, bless his heart, was wearing a suit that fit him about as well as I'd fit into a pair of skinny jeans. The shoulders were too tight, the pants were too short, and he kept tugging at his collar like it was personally attacking him. His hair was gelled within an inch of its life, giving him that wet look that guys think makes them look sophisticated, but actually makes them look like they just emerged from a swimming pool. He was also wearing cologne. I could smell it from across the room. Some aggressive scent that probably had a name like Alpha Predator or Extreme Masculine Force. Their lawyer, Richard Pike, was exactly what you'd picture when you think of a sleazy attorney who advertises on bus benches. Mid-50s, spray tan that was just a shade too orange, teeth so white they were practically glowing, and a suit that screamed, "I peaked in 1997, and I'm still coasting on that energy." He had one of those faces that's permanently set to smug, like he was constantly thinking about how clever he was even when he absolutely wasn't. Lucas leaned over to me as we watched Pike dramatically arrange his papers on the table, making a big show of everything like he was preparing to argue in front of the Supreme Court instead of a routine family court hearing. $20 says he opens with a quote, Lucas whispered. No bet, I whispered back. Guys like that always open with a quote. Probably something about justice or truth that he found on brainyquote.com. Judge Reynolds entered, and we all stood. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and surveyed the courtroom with the expression of a man who'd seen every possible variation of human stupidity and was perpetually unimpressed by all of it. His eyes lingered on me for just a moment, and I swear I saw the tiniest hint of recognition. He'd known Grandpa. He knew what kind of man Henry Whitmore was. This was already not going to go well for Miranda, and she had absolutely no idea. Be seated, Judge Reynolds said. Let's begin. Mr. Pike, I understand you're representing the plaintiffs. Pike stood up so fast I'm surprised he didn't give himself whiplash. He buttoned his jacket, which didn't need buttoning, straightened his tie, which didn't need straightening, and cleared his throat with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for Shakespeare in the Park. Yes, Your Honor, I am. And if I may, I'd like to begin by reminding this courtroom that we are here today because justice, as the great Martin Luther King Jr. once said, is. I leaned over to Lucas. Called it. What love looks like in public. And my clients, Your Honor, have been denied justice. They have been victimized by a calculated, manipulative scheme designed to exploit an elderly man in his most vulnerable moments. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Grandpa Henry, vulnerable? The man had literally negotiated a real estate deal from his hospital bed during that pneumonia scare. He'd once made a lawyer cry during a deposition just by raising one eyebrow. Calling him vulnerable was like calling a great white shark cuddly. Pike was on a roll now, pacing in front of the judge's bench like he was performing for an invisible audience. Your Honor, my client, Ms. Miranda Coleman, was married to the defendant for 5 years. 5 years of devotion, of partnership, of building a life together. And during that time, the defendant systematically isolated his grandfather from his family, from his loved ones, from anyone who might question his growing influence over the elderly man's affairs. Judge Reynolds was writing something down, his expression completely neutral. I couldn't tell if he was taking actual notes or just doodling to maintain his sanity. The defendant, Pike continued, and I noticed he was very carefully not using my name. Probably some lawyer trick to dehumanize me. Used his position as the primary caregiver. Objection, Lucas said calmly, not even standing up. Mr. Whitmore was never his grandfather's primary caregiver. Henry Whitmore lived independently in his own home with occasional assistance from a part-time housekeeper until 2 weeks before his death. Sustained, Judge Reynolds said. Mr. Pike, stick to facts that are actually in evidence. Pike's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly. Very well. The defendant maintained an unusually close relationship with his grandfather, visiting him weekly. Weekly visits with a family member are unusual? Judge Reynolds interrupted, looking up from his notes. I must have missed that memo. A few people in the gallery, mostly court staff and a couple of lawyers waiting for other cases, snickered. Pike's face was turning red, which clashed spectacularly with his orange spray tan, creating a color palette that can only be described as Halloween nightmare. What I mean, Your Honor, is that the defendant leveraged this relationship to gain undue influence over his grandfather's estate planning. He deliberately excluded Ms. Coleman from family gatherings, prevented her from forming a relationship with Mr. Henry Whitmore, and ultimately manipulated the elderly man into leaving him the entire $30 million estate. Objection, Lucas said, this time standing up. Your Honor, the plaintiff was never excluded from anything. In fact, Mr. Marcus Whitmore has documentation showing repeated invitations to family dinners, all of which the plaintiff declined. We'll get to evidence in due course, Judge Reynolds said. Mr. Pike, do you have anything else for your opening statement, or are we done with the theatrical portion of the morning? I love this judge already. Pike, clearly flustered that his dramatic performance wasn't having the desired effect, wrapped up quickly. Your Honor, we will prove that the defendant is not entitled to this inheritance, that it was obtained through fraud and manipulation, and that my clients deserve compensation for the emotional and financial damages they have suffered. He sat down, and Miranda reached over to squeeze his arm, giving him an encouraging smile like he'd just delivered the Gettysburg Address instead of a barely coherent conspiracy theory. Then it was Miranda's turn to testify, and oh boy, this was where things got really entertaining. She took the stand wearing an expression of practiced sadness, the kind you see in those pharmaceutical commercials where they're trying to sell you antidepressants. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth. Irony was working overtime today and settled into the witness chair like she was preparing for a magazine interview about overcoming adversity. Pike started with softball questions. How long were you married? 5 years. Did you love the defendant? Very much. How would you describe your relationship with his family? I tried so hard to be part of his family. But Marcus, he made it very difficult. I nearly choked. Lucas put a hand on my arm, a silent reminder to stay calm and let them dig their own grave. Can you elaborate on that? Pike asked, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Miranda took a deep breath, and I swear to God, she actually managed to make her eyes well up. Where had she learned to cry on command? Was there a class? A YouTube tutorial? Marcus was very protective of his grandfather, almost possessive. Whenever I suggested visiting him, Marcus would make excuses. He said his grandfather was tired, or busy, or not feeling well. He made me feel like I wasn't welcome. This was amazing. She was literally rewriting history in real time, and she was doing it under oath. And how did this make you feel? Pike asked, because apparently we were in therapy now instead of a courtroom. Excluded. Hurt. Like I wasn't good enough to be part of his family. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Oscar-worthy, honestly. I just wanted to know his grandfather. I wanted to be a good granddaughter-in-law. But Marcus kept me at a distance. And do you believe this was intentional? I do. Now, looking back, I realize he was isolating his grandfather so that he could manipulate him without anyone questioning it. He turned Henry against me, against everyone, so that when it came time to write the will, there was no one left to inherit except Marcus. The way she said Grandpa's first name, like they'd been close, like she had any right to use it familiarly, made my blood boil. She'd never earned that right. She'd never even tried. Pike nodded solemnly. And during your marriage, did the defendant ever discuss his grandfather's finances with you? All the time. He was obsessed with the idea that his grandfather was wealthy. He'd talk about the properties, the investments, what everything might be worth someday. It was uncomfortable, honestly, like he was waiting for his grandfather to die. I felt Lucas tense beside me. That was a dangerous accusation, the kind that could actually do damage if a jury believed it. But this wasn't a jury trial. It was just Judge Reynolds, and he was watching Miranda with the expression of someone listening to a sales pitch for a timeshare. No further questions, Pike said, sitting down with a satisfied smile. Now came the fun part. Lucas stood up, took his time walking to the podium, and smiled pleasantly at Miranda. She smiled back, probably thinking she'd nailed her performance, and this was just a formality. Ms. Coleman, Lucas began, his voice friendly and conversational. You testified that you wanted to visit Mr. Henry Whitmore, but that my client prevented you from doing so. Is that correct? Yes, that's right. And you said this happened frequently throughout your 5-year marriage? Yes. Lucas nodded, like this was all making perfect sense. So just to be clear, you're saying that you actively wanted to spend time with your husband's elderly grandfather, to build a relationship with him, but you were prevented from doing so? Exactly. Interesting. Lucas picked up a piece of paper from his table. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Lucas stood there holding Exhibit A like it was the Holy Grail, and I could see Miranda's confidence starting to crack just a little bit around the edges. Her smile was still plastered on, But there was something in her eyes now, a tiny flicker of uncertainty, like she was suddenly remembering that actions have consequences and lies have receipts. Ms. Coleman. Lucas continued in that same pleasant, conversational tone that somehow made everything he said sound more devastating. Before we get to this exhibit, I just want to clarify something. You said you've been with Mr. Trent Davis since your fitness boot camp. When exactly did you start attending that boot camp? Miranda blinked, clearly not expecting that question. I'm not sure of the exact date. Let me help you remember. According to your own Instagram posts, which are public, by the way, you posted your first photo at Elite Fitness Philadelphia on March 15th, 4 years ago. Does that sound right? I suppose so, yes. And you filed for divorce from my client on July 22nd, 3 years ago. Correct? Yes. So that's roughly 16 months between when you met Mr. Davis and when you left my client. Does that timeline sound accurate? You could see the math happening behind her eyes, see her trying to figure out where this was going and how bad it was going to be. I guess so, but I don't see what that has to. We'll get there, Lucas said smoothly. Now, you testified that you wanted to visit Mr. Henry Whitmore, but my client prevented you. I'm holding here a copy of text message exchanges between you and Mr. Marcus Whitmore. These are from your phone records, which we were able to subpoena. May I approach, Your Honor? Judge Reynolds nodded, and Lucas handed copies to the judge, to Pike, and kept one for himself. I watched Miranda's face go from tan to pale in about 3 seconds flat. She knew what was in those texts. She knew exactly what was coming. Let me read a few of these aloud, if I may, Lucas said. This is from September 10th, 6 years ago. My client texts you. Grandpa asked if you wanted to come to dinner Sunday. Says he makes the best lasagna in Philadelphia and wants to prove it to you. Your response, can't babe, getting my hair done. Tell him rain check. Miranda shifted in her seat. I was busy that day. Oh, we have more. Lucas interrupted cheerfully. October 3rd, same year. My client. Grandpa's birthday dinner this Sunday at 6. Would mean a lot if you came. Your response, birthday dinners are so boring. Can we just send a card? A few people in the gallery gasped. Even Trent looked uncomfortable, which was impressive because I didn't think he had the emotional range to feel secondhand embarrassment. Lucas flipped a page. November 20th. My client. Thanksgiving at Grandpa's. He's really looking forward to meeting you. Your response, do we have to? I already committed to my family's thing. Those texts are out of context, Miranda said, her voice rising slightly. You can't just. Context. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Let's talk about context then. Your Honor, I have here a complete record of every invitation my client extended to Ms. Coleman over their 5-year marriage. In total, he invited her to 53 Sunday dinners, 7 holidays, for birthdays, and 1 hospital visit when Mr. Whitmore had pneumonia. She attended 3 Sunday dinners, 2 of which were mandatory holidays, and 0 of everything else. Judge Reynolds was reading through the text messages, and his expression had gone from neutral to something resembling barely controlled annoyance. Ms. Coleman, these messages appear to directly contradict your earlier testimony. I can explain, Miranda started, but Lucas wasn't done. Actually, Your Honor, it gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. May I present Exhibit B? Oh man, this was the good stuff. Lucas pulled out a stack of printouts that looked like they'd come from social media, and I knew exactly what they were because I'd helped him compile them. Every single Instagram post, Facebook check-in, and Twitter update Miranda had made during times when she'd claimed to be too busy or too tired to visit Grandpa. This is from the same day as that September 10th text, Lucas said, holding up a printout. The day Ms. Coleman said she couldn't come to dinner because she was getting her hair done. Here's her Instagram post from that evening. Girls' night at Coda. Best cocktails in the city. Complete with a photo of her at a bar with 6 friends. Timestamp 7:45 p.m. Miranda's lawyer jumped up. Objection. What is this, social media stalking? It's publicly available information, Lucas said calmly. Ms. Coleman chose to post these photos publicly. I'm simply providing evidence that contradicts her testimony. Overruled, Judge Reynolds said, and he actually sounded interested now. Continue, Mr. Shaw. Lucas went through post after post, each one more damning than the last. The time she said she had a migraine, but posted pictures from a wine tasting. The time she claimed to be working on a major project, but checked into a spa for a full day of treatments. The Thanksgiving she skipped because of her family's thing that turned out to be a weekend trip to Miami with Trent. Yeah, that one raised some eyebrows. And here's my personal favorite, Lucas said, holding up another printout. This is from April 12th, 2 years ago. My client invited Ms. Coleman to the hospital because his grandfather had pneumonia and the doctors weren't sure he'd make it through the night. Her response, and I quote, "That's really sad, but I can't handle hospital vibes right now. Send him my love." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the stenographer had stopped typing and was just staring at Miranda with open disgust. That same night, Lucas continued, Ms. Coleman posted this photo to Instagram. Date night with my king, featuring her and Mr. Davis at an expensive steakhouse. My client was at the hospital, holding his grandfather's hand, thinking he might die. And Ms. Coleman was taking selfies with her personal trainer. That's enough, Pike shouted, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward. Your Honor, this is character assassination. None of this is relevant to. It's extremely relevant, Lucas shot back. The plaintiff claims she was excluded from the family and prevented from forming a relationship with Mr. Whitmore. I'm proving that she actively chose not to participate, repeatedly and consistently, for years. You can't claim someone isolated you from a relationship you never wanted in the first place. Judge Reynolds held up a hand. Mr. Pike, sit down. The objection is overruled. Mr. Shaw, proceed. Miranda was crying now, but these weren't the pretty, controlled tears from earlier. These were real tears, mascara-running, face-crumpling tears of someone who'd just realized they'd been caught in a massive lie under oath. Lucas walked back to our table, picked up another folder, and returned to the podium. Now, Ms. Coleman, let's talk about your relationship with Mr. Trent Davis. You testified that you've known him for 4 years, correct? Yes, she whispered. And when did your romantic relationship with him begin? After my divorce. After? Are you sure about that? Silence. Because I have here screenshots from a backup Instagram account you maintained under the username FitQueenAdventures. Private account. Only 47 followers, but one of those followers was your friend Chloe, who was very cooperative when we explained this was for a legal proceeding. Miranda looked like she was going to throw up. Trent had gone completely white, his spray tin the only thing giving him any color. Lucas held up printout after printout. Miranda and Trent at the gym, kissing in the parking lot, dated 8 months before the divorce. Miranda and Trent at a hotel, captioned, Weekend Getaway with My Person, dated 6 months before the divorce. Miranda and Trent at the beach, clearly couple Y, dated 4 months before the divorce. So let me ask you again, Ms. Coleman, and remember you're under oath, Lucas said quietly. When did your romantic relationship with Mr. Davis begin? She couldn't speak. She literally couldn't form words. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Your Honor, Lucas said, I think the evidence speaks for itself. The plaintiff committed perjury when she claimed to want a relationship with Mr. Whitmore. She committed perjury when she claimed my client isolated her. And she just committed perjury when she claimed her relationship with Mr. Davis began after the divorce. Everything about this case is based on lies. I have more, Lucas said, and I loved how calm he sounded, like he was ordering coffee instead of systematically destroying someone's credibility. Ms. Coleman, do you remember asking Mr. Henry Whitmore for money? I never, Miranda started. Exhibit C, Lucas said, holding up more papers. Text messages between Ms. Coleman and Mr. Henry Whitmore. The phone number is confirmed to be his. These messages show Ms. Coleman reaching out to Mr. Whitmore directly, bypassing my client entirely, on 6 separate occasions. Let me read one. Hi, Henry. Marcus talks about you all the time. I'm starting a skincare line and looking for investors. Would love to chat about opportunities. Judge Reynolds looked up sharply. She contacted him directly asking for money. Multiple times, Your Honor. And each time Mr. Whitmore politely declined. And each time she stopped responding to his messages. He invited her to lunch 3 times after these exchanges. She never responded. He invited her to Christmas dinner. No response. The only time Ms. Coleman showed any interest in communicating with Mr. Whitmore was when she wanted financial backing. This is absurd. Pike finally found his voice. These messages could be. They're authenticated, Lucas said flatly. Phone records, timestamps, metadata, everything. Would you like me to call in a digital forensics expert to testify? Because I brought one, and he's waiting outside. Pike sat down, defeated. Lucas turned back to Miranda. So, just to summarize, you never wanted a relationship with Mr. Whitmore. You repeatedly declined invitations. You were cheating on my client for at least a year before the divorce. You only contacted Mr. Whitmore when you wanted money. And you're now claiming you deserve part of an inheritance from a man you couldn't be bothered to visit even once when he was dying. Is that accurate? Miranda was full-on sobbing now. We needed. It's not fair that Marcus gets everything. Life isn't fair, Miss Coleman, Judge Reynolds said coldly. But the law is. And the law says you have no claim to this estate. The judge looked at Pike with an expression that could freeze hell. Counselor, is there anything else? Or are we done wasting the court's time? Pike stood up weakly. No, Your Honor. Good. Because I have some things to say. After watching Lucas absolutely demolish Miranda's entire case with the legal equivalent of a tactical nuke, Judge Reynolds called a 15-minute recess. I think he needed time to compose himself and figure out how to professionally express what probably translated to, "Are you freaking kidding me with this nonsense?" in proper legal language. Miranda practically ran out of the courtroom, Trent following behind her like a confused golden retriever who just realized his owner was actually terrible. Pike gathered his papers with the energy of a man contemplating early retirement and perhaps a career change to something less soul-crushing, like being a DMV employee or a phone company customer service representative. Lucas and I stayed seated. He was making notes, completely calm, while I was trying to process the fact that I'd just watched my ex-wife commit perjury multiple times and then get caught in spectacular fashion. That went well, Lucas said without looking up from his legal pad. That was beautiful, I replied. I mean, I knew we had the evidence, but watching you actually use it, that was like watching a master chef work. Except instead of food, you were serving justice with a side of humiliation. Wait until you testify, Lucas said. That's when we really drive it home. When we reconvened, the energy in the courtroom had completely shifted. Miranda looked like she'd been crying in the bathroom. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes were red, and she'd lost that artificial confidence she'd walked in with. Trent looked like he was seriously reconsidering his life choices, which, to be fair, he should have been doing for the past 4 years. Pike looked like he wanted to be literally anywhere else on the planet. Judge Reynolds settled back into his seat and looked directly at Lucas. Mr. Shaw, does the defense wish to call any witnesses? Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Marcus Whitmore. This was it. My moment to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, which was going to be way more satisfying than I'd imagined. I stood up, walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore the oath. The same oath Miranda had sworn about 30 minutes ago before lying her face off. The difference was, I actually meant it. Lucas started with the basics. Mr. Whitmore, can you tell the court about your relationship with your grandfather, Henry Whitmore? I took a deep breath and looked directly at Judge Reynolds, not at Miranda, not at her lawyer, just at the judge who'd known Grandpa and would understand what I was about to say. My grandfather raised me, I began. My parents got divorced when I was 12, and neither of them really had their act together enough to be full-time parents. Dad moved to Arizona. Mom was dealing with her own stuff, and Grandpa just stepped up. He didn't have to. He was already in his 60s, already retired, could have been playing golf or traveling or doing whatever retired judges do. But he took me in, made sure I did my homework, taught me how to be a decent human being. And did that relationship continue into your adulthood? Lucas asked. Every single week. Sunday dinners were our thing. We'd play chess. He beat me probably 70% of the time, even when he was 86. We'd watch whatever game was on. We'd talk about everything from politics to philosophy to why the Phillies can never seem to get their act together. He was my best friend, honestly. The one person I could always count on to tell me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. And did you invite your ex-wife, Miss Coleman, to these dinners? Every single time. For 5 years, I invited her. Every Sunday. I'd say Grandpa wants us to come over, and she'd have an excuse. She was tired, she had plans, she had a headache, she had to work on her business. After the first year, Grandpa stopped asking if she was coming. He'd just set 2 places at the table instead of 3. Did that bother him? I paused, remembering. He never said it out loud, but yeah, I think it did. Grandpa was old school. Family was everything to him. The fact that my wife didn't care enough to show up, didn't care enough to even try to know him, I think that hurt. But he never complained. He just accepted it and moved on. Lucas nodded. Now, Miss Coleman testified that you prevented her from visiting your grandfather. Is that true? No. That's a complete lie. I begged her to come. I told her how much it would mean to him, how much it would mean to me. She just didn't care. And honestly, after a while, I stopped pushing because I realized Grandpa deserved better than someone who was only showing up because she felt obligated. Did you ever discuss your grandfather's wealth with Miss Coleman? This was important, and I wanted to get it right. Never in the way she described. Yeah, I knew Grandpa had money. He owned properties. He'd been successful. It wasn't a secret. But I never sat around calculating what I might inherit someday. That's disgusting. The thought never even crossed my mind because I wasn't spending time with him for his money. I was spending time with him because I loved him. I saw Miranda look down at her hands. Good. She should feel ashamed. When did you learn about the full extent of your grandfather's estate? Lucas asked. At the reading of his will, about 3 hours after his funeral. I thought I was going to get his chess set, maybe his watch. When the lawyer told me I was inheriting $30 million, I literally thought it was a mistake. I asked him to repeat it 3 times because I couldn't process it. And what was your reaction? I smiled, remembering that surreal moment in Bernie's office. Honestly, after the shock wore off, I laughed. Because 3 months earlier, Miranda had left me thinking I was a broke maintenance worker with no prospects. She left me for a guy with abs and no ambition because she thought that was a better bet. And then Grandpa left me everything. And I realized the universe has a sense of humor after all. A few people in the gallery chuckled. Even Judge Reynolds cracked a tiny smile. Did your grandfather have any relationship with Miss Coleman? Lucas asked. He tried. After the text messages, she sent him asking for money. Which, by the way, I didn't know about until we pulled phone records for this case. He invited her to lunch. 3 separate times. She never responded. He invited her to Christmas dinner 2 years in a row. Nothing. The only time she reached out to him was when she wanted him to invest in her skincare line, which I'm pretty sure never actually existed beyond some Pinterest boards and wishful thinking. And how did he feel about that? He told me, son, people who only call when they need something aren't family, they're salespeople. He wasn't angry about it, just disappointed. He'd seen enough people in his life try to use him that it didn't surprise him anymore. But I know it hurt him that my wife, the person I'd chosen to build a life with, couldn't even pretend to care about him unless there was money involved. Lucas walked back to his table and picked up a folder I recognized. This was the good stuff, the evidence that was going to seal this case shut tighter than a pickle jar. Mr. Whitmore, did your grandfather leave any instructions regarding his estate and his reasoning for his choices? He left a letter for me to read after he died. And what did that letter say? I pulled out the copy I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket, the one I'd read probably 50 times since that day in Bernie's office. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded it. He wrote, "You earned this inheritance. Not by being born into the family, not by sucking up to me, not by showing up at the end with flowers and fake tears. You earned it by having backbone. You showed up every Sunday for 20 years, even when you had better things to do. You called me every Wednesday evening, even when I know you were exhausted from work. You sat with me in the hospital during that pneumonia scare 3 years ago, and you never once asked about my will or my money. You came because you cared, and that's rarer than you think." My voice cracked a little, but I kept reading. "Everyone else in this family sees me as a bank account with a pulse. You saw me as Henry. That's worth more than all the money I made in my entire life. So here's your inheritance. Everything I built, everything I saved, everything I invested. Use it wisely. Use it well. And remember who showed up when everyone else left." The courtroom was completely silent. I looked up and saw that even the stenographer had tears in her eyes. "That's the kind of man my grandfather was," I said. "He didn't leave me his money because I manipulated him or because I isolated him. He left it to me because I loved him, because I showed up, because when he was sick and dying, I was the one holding his hand, not out there posting Instagram stories about living my best life." I looked directly at Miranda for the first time since I'd taken the stand. She was crying again, but this time I didn't feel sorry for her. Not even a little bit. She had 5 years to know him, I said. 5 years to be part of our family. 5 years to show up for Sunday dinner or call him on his birthday or just ask how he was doing. She chose not to. And now she's mad that she doesn't get to cash in on a relationship she never wanted in the first place. That's not how inheritance works. That's not how family works. That's not how anything works. Lucas let that hang in the air for a moment before asking his final question. If you could say anything to your grandfather now, what would it be? I smiled, thinking about all those Sunday dinners, all those chess games, all those conversations. I'd say thank you. Thank you for teaching me that integrity matters more than money. Thank you for showing me what real family looks like. Thank you for loving me even when I made stupid decisions, like marrying someone who didn't deserve to know you. And thank you for being wise enough to leave your fortune to someone who loved you for who you were, not what you had. No further questions, Your Honor. Pike stood up for cross-examination, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. He asked a few half-hearted questions about whether I'd known about the estate planning, whether Grandpa had ever seemed confused or easily influenced, whether I'd pressured him in any way. I answered honestly, no, and absolutely not. After about 5 minutes of getting nowhere, Pike sat down, looking defeated. Judge Reynolds leaned back in his chair, removed his glasses, and rubbed his eyes like he'd just witnessed something that had physically exhausted him. When he looked up, his expression was somewhere between disappointed and disgusted. I knew Henry Whitmore, the judge said quietly. Not well, but I knew him. We served on the bench together for several years. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that Henry Whitmore was one of the sharpest, most perceptive men I've ever met. The idea that anyone could manipulate him into doing anything he didn't want to do is laughable. He looked at Miranda with an expression that could have frozen nitrogen. Miss Coleman, I've been a judge for 27 years. I've seen every kind of case, every kind of claim, every kind of person. And this is one of the most frivolous, baseless lawsuits I've ever had the misfortune of presiding over. Oh, this was about to be good. Judge Reynolds adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, the kind of sound that meant someone was about to get absolutely destroyed in the most professional way possible. After reviewing the evidence presented today, he began, his voice carrying that particular tone of judicial authority mixed with barely concealed irritation. I find that the plaintiff's case is without merit. The evidence clearly shows that Mr. Marcus Whitmore maintained a consistent, loving relationship with his grandfather for decades. The plaintiffs, however, demonstrated interest only when financial gain was involved. Miranda's face crumpled. Trent looked confused, like he was still trying to figure out what without merit meant. Miss Coleman, your testimony was contradicted by your own text messages, social media posts, and phone records. You committed perjury multiple times on this stand. Not only is your case dismissed with prejudice, meaning you cannot refile, but you will also be responsible for paying Mr. Whitmore's legal fees, which I imagine are substantial. Pike tried to stand. Your Honor, if we could. Sit down, Mr. Pike. I'm not finished. 3 weeks after the courtroom victory, Mrs. Henderson, Grandpa's elderly neighbor, showed up at my door holding a weathered envelope. Henry gave this to me years ago, she said softly. Told me to give it to you when the time was right. I think now's the time. Inside were letters Grandpa had written but never sent. My hands trembled as I read his elegant handwriting. Marcus, if she ever tries to come back, remember, forgiveness doesn't mean stupidity. You can forgive someone and still keep them out of your life. Another one read, Love is showing up. You did. She didn't. That's all that matters. I framed that second letter and hung it above my desk in my new office. Yes, I finally moved out of that studio apartment. I took Grandpa's advice seriously, invested wisely, donated a chunk to veteran scholarships in his name, and started my own law firm. I called it Whitmore and Witt. The Witt part was intentional, and Grandpa would have loved it. 5 years later, life had become something I never thought possible during those dark days of eating ramen in my studio apartment with Abraham Lincoln staring down at me from the ceiling. The law firm was thriving beyond my wildest expectations, with 3 partners, 12 associates, and a reputation for taking cases that other firms wouldn't touch. We specialized in representing people who'd been betrayed, underestimated, or screwed over by someone they trusted. Turns out, there's no shortage of that particular brand of human garbage in the world, which meant business was unfortunately booming. I'd also gotten remarried, which surprised everyone including myself. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything Miranda wasn't. She was a high school English teacher who drove a sensible Toyota, packed her own lunches, and thought manifesting abundance was something you did by working hard and being a decent person. Our first date was at a diner, and when the check came, she insisted on splitting it. I knew right then I was going to marry her. We had a small wedding, family, close friends, and yes, I invited her to meet everyone in my life before I proposed because I'd learned that lesson the hard way. She got along with everyone because she was genuine, kind, and actually showed up when she said she would. Revolutionary concept. We lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs. Nothing too flashy because neither of us needed to prove anything to anyone. We had a dog named Chester who was dumb as a box of rocks, but had more loyalty in his furry body than Miranda had in her entire existence. Life was good. Better than good. Life was exactly what Grandpa had wanted for me. Stable, happy, and built on a foundation of actual integrity rather than Instagram filters and protein shake philosophies. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from the mayor's office. Philadelphia was dedicating a new courthouse, and they wanted to name it after Grandpa, the Henry Whitmore Justice Center. They asked if I'd speak at the dedication ceremony, and obviously I said yes, because how do you say no to honoring the man who gave you everything, including the wisdom to recognize trash disguised as treasure? The day of the dedication was perfect. Clear blue sky, crisp autumn air, the kind of day that makes you believe the universe occasionally gets things right. The new courthouse was beautiful, all glass and steel and modern architecture, with Grandpa's name carved in stone above the entrance. Inside the main lobby hung a massive portrait of him in his judicial robes, looking exactly how I remembered him, intelligent, dignified, and with just a hint of amusement in his eyes like he knew something you didn't. Hundreds of people showed up, judges, lawyers, politicians, former clerks, people whose lives Grandpa had touched over his 8 decades of being awesome. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and felt Sarah squeeze my hand before I stepped up to speak. My grandfather, Henry Whitmore, taught me 2 fundamental things. I began, my voice echoing through the marble lobby. First, always tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. Because lies have a way of catching up to you, usually in the most spectacular fashion possible. The crowd chuckled, and I saw several judges nodding knowingly. And second, I continued, unable to resist. Never date anyone who hashtags boss babe unironically. That's just asking for trouble. The laughter was genuine this time, the kind that comes from recognizing universal truth wrapped in humor. Sarah was shaking her head, but smiling. In all seriousness, I said, my tone shifting, Grandpa taught me that character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when no one's looking, when there's no reward, when the only person who knows is you. He taught me that showing up matters, that consistency matters, that loving people isn't about grand gestures or social media posts. It's about being there, week after week, year after year, whether it's convenient or not. I looked up at his portrait, and I swear those painted eyes were twinkling. He left me more than money. He left me a blueprint for how to be a decent human being in a world that doesn't always reward decency. He showed me that integrity is the only currency that actually appreciates over time. And he proved that the people who show up when you have nothing are worth more than all the people who show up when you have everything. I paused, gathering my thoughts for the final point I wanted to make. 5 years ago, I stood in a courtroom and watched someone try to claim they deserved a piece of his legacy without ever earning it. They thought family was about biology or marriage certificates or legal entitlement. But Grandpa knew better. Family is about showing up. It's about choice. It's about proving through your actions, day after day, that you actually give a damn. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. So today, as we dedicate this building in his honor, I want everyone who walks through these doors to remember what Henry Whitmore actually stood for. Not wealth or power or prestige, though he had all 3, but integrity, consistency, showing up, telling the truth even when it costs you, being there for people who can't offer you anything in return except their love and respect. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. And maybe, just maybe, being smart enough to recognize when someone's only interested in your bank account and not your Sunday dinners. That's wisdom worth more than $30 million, trust me. After the ceremony, After the handshakes and the photographs and the speeches from people who'd worked with Grandpa, I found myself alone in front of his portrait. Sarah had taken Chester for a walk, giving me space for what she knew I needed to do. I stood there, looking up at the painted version of the man who'd saved my life in more ways than one, and I whispered, "We won, Grandpa. They tried their best, but your plan worked perfectly. You taught me to keep receipts, and boy, did I keep them." I could almost hear his laugh, that dry chuckle he'd do when something amused him. "I'm doing good," I continued quietly. "The firm's helping people. I married someone who actually shows up, and I'm trying to be half the man you were. I think you'd be proud. At least, I hope you would be." The portrait didn't answer, obviously, but I didn't need it to. I knew. I walked out of the Henry Whitmore Justice Center into the afternoon sunshine, where Sarah was waiting with Chester pulling on his leash, trying to chase a pigeon. She smiled at me, the kind of smile that said she understood everything without me having to explain, and we headed home together. Behind me, carved in stone above the courthouse entrance, Grandpa's name would remind everyone who entered that justice, real justice, isn't just about laws and verdicts. It's about truth. It's about showing up. It's about choosing every single day to be a person of integrity, even when, especially when, it would be easier not to. Love shows up. Greed shows out. And sometimes, karma wears a robe and a gavel. Grandpa would have loved that line. At my wife's mother's birthday, my wife's sister said, "We didn't order for you," handing me a plate of leftover pasta. While they all ate $15,000 expensive steaks and dessert, my wife added, "You should have sat at the kids' table." I just smiled and said, "Noted." When the waiter came back, I stood up and announced, "Look, I'm not saying I expected a parade when I walked into Le Chateau Noir that Saturday night, but I definitely didn't expect to be treated like the family dog who wandered into a wedding reception uninvited." The restaurant was one of those places where the chandeliers probably cost more than my first car, and the carpet was so plush you felt guilty walking on it with anything less than Italian leather shoes. Everything sparkled like someone had gone absolutely insane with a bedazzler, and the whole place smelled like money mixed with truffle oil and the faint desperation of people trying way too hard to impress each other. This wasn't just any dinner. Oh no, this was Queen Matilda's 60th birthday extravaganza. And by Queen Matilda, I mean my mother-in-law, who genuinely believed she deserved a crown for surviving 6 decades without developing a personality beyond judgmental. The woman had sent out invitations on actual cardstock with gold embossing, like she was announcing a royal coronation instead of admitting she was officially old enough for AARP membership. The dress code was elegant evening attire, which in Zara's family language translates to dress like you're about to inherit a vineyard in Napa Valley, even though you're basically one bad investment away from shopping at Costco. I'll give them credit though, they committed to the bit. Zara's family looked like they'd just stepped off the set of some reality show about wealthy people with boring problems. Her cousin Marcus wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, complete with cufflinks that caught the light every time he gestured wildly while telling some story nobody actually cared about. Aunt Helena had draped herself in enough jewelry to set off a metal detector from 3 blocks away. And don't even get me started on Uncle Richard, who showed up in a purple velvet blazer like he was auditioning for a spot in a 1970s funk band, but got lost and ended up at a birthday dinner instead. The whole scene was basically Crazy Rich Relatives, the dinner theater edition, and I was apparently cast as the comic relief nobody wanted. I'd walked in feeling pretty decent about myself, honestly. I'd worn my good suit, the navy one that Zara hadn't openly mocked in at least 6 months, and I'd even splurged on a fresh haircut earlier that week. I thought maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Maybe they'd finally see me as part of the family instead of that guy who somehow tricked their precious Zara into marrying down. Spoiler alert, I was wrong. So wrong. The seating arrangement should have been my first clue. Everyone else had these elegant place cards with calligraphy so fancy it looked like the letters were doing gymnastics. Mine looked like it had been written with a Sharpie by someone's left hand during an earthquake. It was also positioned at the far end of the table, right next to the swinging kitchen doors, which meant I got to enjoy the ambience of stressed-out waiters rushing past me every 45 seconds like I was sitting in the employee break room. But the real kicker came when the food arrived. Picture this. A parade of servers emerged from the kitchen like they were presenting the crown jewels of England. Each plate was a work of art, literally garnished with what I'm pretty sure was edible gold leaf, because apparently regular food isn't fancy enough when you're celebrating being old and judgy. The steaks were imported from some Japanese cow that probably had a better life than most humans, complete with a daily massage routine and a pension plan. I'd heard Matilda bragging earlier that each cut cost about $15,000, which honestly seemed excessive for something you were just going to digest. And, well, you know the rest. Everyone oohed and awed as their plates were set down with the kind of reverence usually reserved for newborn babies or championship trophies. Bianca, Zara's sister and my personal nemesis in designer heels, was practically drooling over her steak like it was going to solve all her problems. Her husband Todd, or as I like to call him, the human Rolex advertisement, was already sawing into his meat with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that suggested he was compensating for something. And then there was my plate. Bianca herself delivered it, which should have been my second clue that something was deeply, cosmically wrong with this situation. She glided over with this smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile sharks probably practice before they eat seals, and she slid a plate in front of me with all the ceremony of someone tossing table scraps to a stray cat. It was pasta. Cold, leftover pasta. The kind that had clearly been sitting in someone's fridge for at least 3 days, judging by the way the sauce had congealed into this sad, orangish film that made me question every life choice that had led me to this exact moment. There were a few limp pieces of what might have once been basil on top, now brown and wilted like they'd given up on life entirely. A single, lonely cherry tomato sat in the corner of the plate like it was trying to escape. "We didn't order for you," Bianca said, her voice dripping with so much fake sweetness I could practically feel my pancreas shutting down in protest. She tilted her head like a confused puppy, except puppies are actually cute and don't make you want to flip tables. "I hope you don't mind. We figured you wouldn't want us spending too much money on your meal anyway. You're always talking about being practical and budgeting and all that boring accountant stuff." Around me, the sound of knives cutting through butter-soft steak filled the air like some kind of culinary symphony designed specifically to mock my existence. Everyone was too busy enjoying their $15,000 cow to even acknowledge the absolute war crime that had just been committed against basic human decency right in front of them. Zara, my darling wife, the woman I'd pledged to love and cherish through sickness and health, leaned over from her spot 2 seats away. She'd positioned herself strategically between her mother and Bianca, forming some kind of holy trinity of judgment. Her lips curled into this smirk that I'd seen before, usually right before she said something designed to cut me down to size in front of her family. "You should have sat at the kids' table," she said, loud enough for everyone within a 5-table radius to hear. A few people actually chuckled, like it was the punchline to a joke I hadn't realized I was part of. "At least they're eating chicken fingers. Probably more your speed anyway, right, honey?" The honey at the end was particularly brutal. It's like when someone says, "bless your heart," in the South. Everyone knows it actually means, "you're an idiot and I feel sorry for you." I looked down at my sad plate of depression pasta. Then I looked at their steaks, still steaming slightly, probably imported on a private jet and hand-delivered by someone with a better job than me. I looked at Bianca's face, all smug satisfaction and designer makeup. I looked at Zara, who was already turning back to her conversation with her mother, completely dismissing me like I was background noise. And you know what? Something inside me clicked. I picked up my glass of water, because of course they hadn't even bothered to pour me wine, and I took a long, slow sip. The ice clinked against the glass in the sudden silence that had fallen over our end of the table, everyone waiting to see if I'd finally crack, if I'd finally give them the dramatic meltdown they'd been poking me toward for the past 3 years. I set the glass down carefully. I smiled. Not a fake smile, not a forced smile, but one of those genuine, peaceful smiles that probably scared them more than any tantrum could have. "Noted," I said simply. That's it. One word. But in husband language, in that secret code that develops after years of swallowing your pride and biting your tongue. Noted means something very specific. It means, I'm about to professionally destroy your entire dinner party while maintaining perfect etiquette. It means, you just made a mistake you don't even know you made yet. It means, game on. Bianca's smirk faltered for just a second. Just one tiny second. But I saw it. And that's when I knew tonight was going to be interesting. Let me paint you a picture of Zara's family, because honestly, they deserve their own exhibit in a museum dedicated to people who peaked in high school and never got over it. These people didn't just look down on me. They had it professionally mounted and framed like it was their greatest achievement. I'm talking years of casual cruelty disguised as family banter, the kind of stuff that would make a therapist rub their hands together and whisper job security under their breath. Zara's mother, Matilda, and yes, she genuinely preferred to be called Queen Matilda at family gatherings, which should tell you everything you need to know about her grip on reality, had made it her personal mission since day one to remind everyone within earshot that her daughter had settled. That was her favorite word. Settled. Like I was some kind of clearance item she'd found in the bargain bin at Target, marked down twice, and still not worth the purchase. Zara could have married an architect. Matilda loved to announce at random intervals, usually during holiday dinners or any moment when there was a lull in conversation and she felt the need to fill it with passive-aggressive disappointment. She had 3 architects interested in her, you know? 3. One of them designed that new performing arts center downtown, the one that won awards. But no, she chose accounting. She always said accounting the way most people say root canal or jury duty, with this mix of disgust and resignation, like she was describing a particularly aggressive form of mold. Never mind that architects and accountants make roughly the same salary, or that the award-winning architect she loved to bring up was currently going through his second divorce and living in his mother's basement. Facts didn't matter in Matilda's carefully constructed narrative where I was the villain who stole her daughter's chance at greatness. The rest of the family had taken their cues from her and run with it like it was an Olympic sport. Bianca, Zara's younger sister and the human embodiment of that girl, TikTok you've ever wanted to throw your phone over, had somehow convinced herself that she was a businesswoman because she ran a catering company that mostly relied on Matilda's country club friends feeling obligated to hire her. She showed up to every family event with her husband Todd, who wore more Rolexes than he had actual personality traits. I'm serious. The man had a different watch for every day of the week, and he'd find ways to work them into conversation like they were his children. Oh, this. Todd would say, literally any time someone made the mistake of making eye contact with him. This is the Submariner. Got it in Switzerland. You know, they only make a certain number each year. There's actually a waiting list, but I have a guy. He always had a guy. For watches, for cars, for restaurant reservations, for opinions nobody asked for. Todd collected guys the way normal people collect refrigerator magnets. Bianca loved to corner me at these events and deliver what she probably thought were subtle digs, but were actually about as subtle as a brick through a window. Mason, sweetie, are you still doing people's taxes? That must be so fulfilling. I mean, I couldn't imagine spending all day with numbers and spreadsheets. But someone has to do it, right? The world needs worker bees, not just queen bees like us. Then she'd laugh this high-pitched laugh that sounded like a car alarm having an existential crisis. But honestly, Bianca wasn't even the worst of them. That honor belonged to Dean, Zara's older brother, who had the unique distinction of being both incredibly rich and incredibly stupid, which is a dangerous combination that usually results in a reality TV show or a scandal involving a yacht. Dean had inherited some money from Matilda's side of the family and promptly decided this made him a financial genius, despite the fact that his biggest investment strategy seemed to be buy expensive things and hope they make me look important. He drove a Maserati he couldn't actually afford the maintenance on, lived in a penthouse apartment that was mostly financed by credit cards, and wore suits that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, but somehow still managed to make him look like a kid playing dress-up in his dad's closet. The absolute worst part about Dean was his complete lack of social awareness. This man once asked me, in front of the entire family at Thanksgiving dinner, if I paid rent per room or per corner. Everyone laughed. Even Zara giggled a little bit before catching herself and squeezing my hand under the table like that somehow made up for not defending me. No, seriously though, Dean had continued, because he was the kind of person who never knew when to stop talking. Like, do apartments that small even have separate rooms? Or is it just one big space where your bed is also your kitchen table? I've always wondered how poor people maximize their square footage. He'd said, poor people, like he was a National Geographic narrator describing an exotic species he'd only read about in textbooks. Never mind that I was sitting right there. Never mind that poor people included like 90% of the actual population. Dean existed in this bubble where anyone who wasn't actively hemorrhaging money on unnecessary luxury items was basically living in a cardboard box. For 3 years, I'd taken this abuse. 3 years of smiling through family dinners where I was the punchline to jokes I didn't find funny. 3 years of Zara promising me it would get better, that they just needed time to warm up to me, that this was just how her family showed affection. 3 years of being introduced to her parents' friends as Zara's husband. He's in accounting, with that same apologetic tone you'd use to explain why you showed up to a party in cargo shorts. I'd ignored the comments about my car, a reliable Honda Civic that Dean once referred to as cute, like a toy car for adults. I'd ignored the jokes about my clothes, my job, my apartment before we got married, my taste in literally everything. I'd smiled and nodded and played the role of the good-natured guy who could take a joke, even when those jokes felt less like comedy and more like death by 1,000 paper cuts. But here's the thing they didn't know, the absolutely delicious thing that I'd been sitting on for the past 6 months like a dragon hoarding the world's most satisfying secret. I wasn't actually just some boring accountant who did people's taxes from a cubicle. I was the CFO of Meridian Holdings, a private equity firm that specialized in acquiring and managing high-end hospitality properties. We owned restaurants, hotels, event spaces, basically anywhere rich people went to spend money while pretending they weren't worried about their portfolios. It was a job I'd worked my ass off to get, climbing the ladder from junior analyst to senior manager to, finally, chief financial officer. I'd earned it through late nights, smart decisions, and actually understanding how money worked instead of just throwing it at problems and hoping for the best. And Le Chateau Noir? This gorgeous, overpriced restaurant where we were currently sitting, where Matilda had insisted on having her birthday dinner because it was exclusive and sophisticated and required reservations 6 months in advance. Yeah, we'd acquired it 3 months ago. Technically, this entire birthday dinner was happening in a restaurant that was under my company's management umbrella. The tables they were sitting at? My payroll maintained them. The waiters serving their $15,000 steaks? Their salaries ran through accounts I personally oversaw. The chandelier Matilda kept pointing at and cooing over? I'd literally approved the budget for its restoration last month. They had no idea. None of them. Zara knew I'd gotten a promotion. I told her I was moving up at work, but she'd been so disinterested in the details that she'd never bothered to ask what exactly my new position entailed. She just knew it came with a bigger paycheck, which meant she could upgrade her handbag collection without me complaining about the credit card bill. As I sat there pushing around my pathetic leftover pasta, watching them all stuff their faces with premium beef and congratulate themselves on being born into the right family, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like clarity. Crystal clear, high definition, 4K clarity about exactly what I needed to do. I'd spent 3 years being their punching bag, their cautionary tale, their example of what happens when you don't aim high enough in life. 3 years of swallowing my pride and biting my tongue because I loved Zara and wanted to make it work with her family. But tonight, with that cold pasta sitting in front of me like a monument to their contempt, tonight, I wasn't in the mood to play nice anymore. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They saw a boring accountant Mason who wore off-the-rack suits and drove a sensible car. They didn't see the guy who'd spent the last decade building real, actual power while they were busy financing their fake lifestyles with debt and delusion. And you know what the best part was? I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to make a scene. I didn't have to stoop to their level of petty cruelty. I just had to let them keep talking long enough to hang themselves. So there I was, fork in hand, staring down at what could only be described as a crime scene involving noodles, and I realized something profound. Revenge is basically just math with better payoff. While everyone else was busy performing their roles in this elaborate theater production called, "Let's remind Mason he's garbage," I was doing what I do best, calculating outcomes, running probability scenarios, and planning exactly how to flip this entire nightmare on its head without spilling a single drop of my water. The thing about being underestimated your entire life is that you develop this superpower. It's like being invisible, except better, because people literally forget you can hear them. They say things around you they'd never say to your face if they actually respected you as a functioning human being with ears and feelings. And tonight? Tonight they were giving me a masterclass in exactly why they deserved what was coming. I watched Bianca across the table, and I mean really watched her. She was in full performance mode, gesturing wildly with her fork like she was conducting an orchestra, telling everyone about her thriving luxury catering business. The way she emphasized luxury made it sound like she was trying to convince herself as much as everyone else. Her voice carried that particular pitch that wealthy people use when they're one bad quarter away from having to admit they've been living on credit for years. "We just secured the Vanderbilt wedding," she announced, pausing for effect like she'd just revealed she'd been cast as the next Bond villain. 300 guests, completely bespoke menu, ice sculptures, the works. They're paying us $250,000 for a single evening. Can you imagine? Todd nodded along like one of those bobblehead dolls people put on their dashboards, his newest Rolex catching the light every time he reached for his wine glass. "That's my girl," he said, which was somehow both condescending and desperate at the same time. Building an empire one truffle at a time. What Bianca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd seen her company's financial statements. Not because I was snooping, but because 6 weeks ago, Royal Events Catering, her biggest supplier and the only reason her little operation hadn't collapsed yet, had come to us looking for acquisition options. They were hemorrhaging money, badly managed, and desperate for someone to buy them out before they went completely under. Meridian Holdings had purchased them for pennies on the dollar. It was almost sad how eager they'd been to sell. And part of that acquisition meant I got access to all their client accounts, their contracts, their entire operational structure, including a very interesting file labeled LeBlanc Luxury Catering, account receivable. Turns out, Bianca owed Royal Events about $200,000 in unpaid invoices. $200,000. She'd been ordering supplies on credit for months, playing this shell game where she'd pay just enough to keep them from cutting her off completely, but never enough to actually clear her debt. It was amateur hour financial management, the kind of thing that made me physically cringe when I reviewed the paperwork. And that Vanderbilt wedding she was bragging about? The one that was supposed to save her business? She'd already committed to a menu that required ingredients she couldn't afford and didn't have the credit line to purchase anymore. Not from Royal Events, anyway. Not now that we own them. I pushed a piece of pasta around my plate and did some quick mental math. If I wanted to, I could call in that debt tomorrow. Just a simple email to our collections department, and Bianca's entire empire would come crashing down faster than you could say bankruptcy court. But that seemed too easy, too quick. Where was the artistry in that? Matilda was holding court at the head of the table, naturally, because the woman couldn't attend an event without positioning herself as the main character. She was going on about some charity gala she was planning, something involving a silent auction and her country club friends competing to see who could spend the most money while claiming to care about poor people. "The theme is an evening in Paris," she declared, like she'd just solved world hunger. "We're bringing in authentic French champagne, hiring a sommelier, the whole experience. Bianca, darling, you're catering it, aren't you? We need it to be absolutely perfect." Bianca's face did this weird thing where she smiled, but her eyes screamed panic. "Of course, mother. I've already started planning the menu. It's going to be Tres Magnifique." She pronounced it Tres Magnifique, which was painful to listen to, but nobody corrected her because this family's knowledge of French began and ended with ordering croissants at Starbucks. I made a mental note. The charity gala was in 6 weeks, right around the time Bianca's suppliers would be cut off and her debt would come due. The timing was almost too perfect. It was like the universe was handing me a gift-wrapped opportunity to watch this entire house of cards collapse in the most spectacular way possible. Dean, meanwhile, was boring some poor cousin from out of town with stories about his latest investment opportunity. I used air quotes in my head because Dean's investment opportunities were usually just expensive mistakes with better marketing. "It's cryptocurrency, but for real estate," he was saying, which made absolutely no sense and proved he understood neither cryptocurrency nor real estate. You buy into these digital property tokens, and then when the value goes up, boom, you're making money while you sleep. It's basically printing cash. The cousin nodded politely, probably trying to figure out how to escape the conversation without causing a scene. I knew that feeling intimately. I'd been trying to escape conversations with Dean for 3 years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out casually, expecting some spam notification or maybe my mom asking if I wanted her to bring over leftovers from Sunday dinner. Real leftovers, the kind made with love instead of spite. But it was Leo, my business partner, and the only person at Meridian who knew exactly how much I was secretly worth. Leo was one of those guys who could smell a good revenge plot from a mile away, and he'd been encouraging me for months to stop being so nice to people who didn't deserve it. The text read, "The new audit clause is ready for your signature. Also, you're going to love this. Royal Events Contract Review turned up some interesting accounting irregularities with the LeBlanc account. Want me to dig deeper?" I felt my smile widen. Not the polite, fake smile I'd been wearing all night. A real one. The kind that probably made me look slightly unhinged if anyone had been paying attention to me, which they weren't. Accounting irregularities. That was Leo's polite way of saying someone had been cooking the books. And if Bianca had been fudging numbers to hide how badly her business was doing, well, that opened up a whole new world of possibilities that went beyond just calling in her debt. I typed back quickly. Dig. I want everything by Monday morning. Perfect timing didn't even begin to cover it. This was divine intervention, karma, and Christmas morning all rolled into one beautiful moment. Zara leaned over again, probably to make another comment about how I looked out of place, or how I was being too quiet, or some other observation designed to make me feel small. But before she could open her mouth, I held up my phone. "Work stuff?" I said simply. "You know how it is. Numbers don't calculate themselves." She rolled her eyes and turned back to her conversation with Bianca about some spa day they were planning. They were talking about hot stone massages and facial treatments that cost more than most people's car payments, completely oblivious to the fact that Bianca might not be able to afford her own spa day in a few weeks, let alone anyone else's. I went back to watching them all, but now it was different. Now I wasn't just the punching bag sitting quietly in the corner. I was a chess player 3 moves ahead, watching my opponents celebrate victories they hadn't actually won yet. Bianca bragged about expansion plans. Dean rambled about his crypto schemes. Matilda preened and accepted compliments. Todd checked his watch for the 15th time. Zara laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and I sat there with my cold pasta and my warm phone, feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 years of family dinners. Power. Here's something they don't teach you in business school, but absolutely should. Humiliation is an art form, and I'd been their favorite canvas for 3 years straight. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every random brunch where Matilda decided we all needed to bond over overpriced eggs. I was the entertainment. The punchline. The cautionary tale about what happens when you don't marry up. But here's what art critics never tell you. Sometimes the canvas fights back. See, while they'd been busy perfecting their technique of making me feel like garbage, I'd been doing something revolutionary. Something they couldn't even comprehend because it required actual work instead of just inherited money and delusions of grandeur. I'd been building power. Real, tangible, shut your mouth and sit down kind of power. The silent kind that doesn't need to announce itself at dinner parties because it's too busy actually making moves. Zara used to mock me constantly about my relationship with money. I'd walked into the living room, smiled at her drunk friends who immediately went quiet like kids caught talking about their teacher, and said, "That's because I don't negotiate with emotional terrorists." The room went silent. Zara's face had turned this interesting shade of red that suggested I'd crossed some invisible line by defending myself in my own apartment. Her friends had exchanged those looks that said, "Yikes, trouble in paradise," and I'd simply grabbed my water from the kitchen and gone back to my office. But I'd meant it. Money is emotional for most people. They spend it to feel better, to impress others, to fill some void that probably requires therapy instead of a shopping spree. Me? I treated it like the tool it was. Cold, calculated, strategic. And those strategies had been paying off. Literally. While Dean was buying Maseratis he couldn't afford, and Bianca was playing pretend CEO with a catering company held together by unpaid invoices and prayer, I'd been quietly building a portfolio of investments that would make their heads spin if they knew about it. Shell corporations, holding companies, strategic acquisitions, the kind of boring financial stuff they'd never bother to understand because it didn't come with a logo you could show off. One of those holdings was Emerald Ventures LLC, a company I'd structured specifically to acquire distressed hospitality businesses. And wouldn't you know it, about 8 weeks ago, Emerald had purchased Royal Events Catering for about 60 cents on the dollar. They'd been desperate to sell, drowning in debt, and we'd swooped in like financial vultures with checkbooks. Royal Events was Bianca's lifeline. Her entire business model depended on them. They supplied everything, the ingredients, the equipment rentals, even some of the staff for bigger events. Without Royal Events, Bianca's luxury catering empire was basically just her, a commercial kitchen she rented by the hour, and a dream board she'd probably made during a vision quest at some wellness retreat. And now I owned it. Well, technically Emerald Ventures owned it, and Meridian Holdings had a controlling interest in Emerald Ventures, and I was the CFO of Meridian Holdings. So by the transitive property of corporate structure that they'd never understand, I essentially controlled the company that controlled Bianca's entire future. The beauty of it was the silence. She had no idea. None of them did. They were so busy looking down at me that they never noticed I'd been building a ladder right under their noses. While Bianca bragged about her client list tonight, I knew that client list was about to get a lot shorter. While Dean rambled about his crypto schemes, I knew his investment portfolio was probably worth less than my grocery budget. While Matilda preened about her charity connections, I knew half those connections were people whose businesses I'd either acquired or analyzed for acquisition. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and messy and makes you do stupid things. What I felt was colder, clearer. It was the feeling you get when you've finally decided to stop playing defense and go on offense. When you realize you're not stuck in their game. You're just letting them think they're winning while you rewrite the rules. Zara had once told me during an argument that I needed to be more ambitious, like her family. She'd actually said that. Like watching Dean finance a lifestyle he couldn't afford, or Bianca pretend her way through running a business was somehow the blueprint for success. I told her then that ambition without strategy is just expensive failure with better lighting. She hadn't understood. But she would. They all would. Because tonight, sitting here with my sad pasta and my quiet calculations, I'd decided something important. I was done being the family joke. Done being the one they pitted and mocked and treated like an embarrassing relative they had to tolerate. It was time for them to see exactly who they'd been underestimating all these years. And the best part? They were going to destroy themselves. I just had to give them enough rope and watch them braid it into a noose. The universe has impeccable timing sometimes, and tonight it was showing off. Just as I'd finished mentally calculating exactly how many ways I could professionally ruin everyone at this table, our waiter materialized beside me like he'd been summoned by my thoughts alone. His name was Marcus. I could see it on his name tag, and he had that particular expression that good waiters develop after years of serving wealthy people. Polite interest masking complete awareness of all the dysfunction happening around him. "How is everything this evening, sir?" Marcus asked, his eyes briefly flickering to my pasta with what I'm pretty sure was sympathy. The man had probably seen some things working at Le Chateau Noir, but even he seemed mildly horrified by the sad plate of leftovers sitting in front of me while everyone else ate, like Roman emperors at a feast. I looked up at him, and something just clicked. Maybe it was the Leo's text still burning a hole in my pocket. Maybe it was 3 years of accumulated spite finally reaching critical mass. Or maybe I was just tired of being the bigger person when nobody else at this table could even spell maturity without autocorrect. I stood up slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you're about to either propose a toast or start a fight, and people can't quite tell which one it's going to be. My chair scraped against the expensive hardwood floor, and the sound cut through the dinner conversation like a record scratch in a movie. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even Todd stopped checking his watch, which was honestly more shocking than anything else. I picked up my water glass and tapped it gently with my fork. The crystal rang out clear and sharp, and suddenly I had everyone's attention. All eyes on Mason, the guy they'd been ignoring all night except when they needed someone to mock. The power in that moment was intoxicating. "Marcus," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent table. "I'll take the private suite. The Bordeaux room, if it's available." I paused, letting that sink in. The Bordeaux room was legendary. It seated up to 20 people, had its own sommelier, and cost more to reserve than most people's monthly rent. And whatever the chef recommends for everyone here. The full experience. Wine pairings, appetizers, the works. All on me. You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you could have heard a pin thinking about dropping and then deciding against it because the silence was that profound. Bianca was the first to break it, naturally. She snorted, actually snorted, like I'd just announced I was buying everyone a trip to Mars. You? On you. She looked around the table for support, that mean girl smirk plastered across her face. Mason, sweetie, this is an Olive Garden. You can't just use unlimited breadsticks as a flex here. A few people laughed nervously. Todd grinned like Christmas had come early. Matilda raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, the universal gesture for this should be entertaining. But it was Zara's reaction that really got me. My own wife, the woman who'd promised to love and cherish me, who'd stood at an altar and made vows that apparently came with an asterisk for family dinners, rolled her eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't get stuck. You can't even afford dessert here, Mason, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She said it loud enough for the tables near us to hear, because public humiliation is apparently a family value in the LeBlanc household. Let's not embarrass ourselves more than we already have tonight, okay? I looked at her, really looked at her, and I smiled. Not the fake, plastered-on smile I'd been wearing all evening. Not the tight-lipped, I'm fine everything-s fine smile I'd perfected over 3 years of family torture. This was something different. Something that probably looked peaceful on the surface, but had an undercurrent of danger running through it like an electrical wire in bathwater. Oh, I can, I said softly, which somehow made it more effective than shouting. The whole table leaned in slightly to hear me. In fact, you're all going to love the presentation. It comes with surprise side effects. Like what? Dean asked, because the man had never met a setup he didn't walk directly into. I turned to him, still smiling that dangerous smile. Like humility, and maybe a side of perspective. Chef's specialty, apparently. Marcus, bless him, didn't even blink. Professional to his core, he just nodded smoothly and gestured toward the back of the restaurant. Right this way, sir. I'll inform the chef immediately. Should I have the sommelier bring the reserve collection for the wine pairings? Please do, I said, like I ordered 5-figure dinners every Tuesday. And Marcus? Take your time with the presentation. I want everyone to really savor this. The double meaning wasn't lost on him. I caught the tiniest quirk of his lips before he resumed his professional mask. As I followed Marcus toward the private dining area, the whispers erupted behind me like I'd just announced I was running for president or joining a cult. I could hear Bianca's voice rising above the others. Is he serious? Where did he even get that kind of money? Did he rob a bank? Zara was frantically whispering something to her mother, probably trying to figure out if this was real or if I'd finally had a complete mental breakdown and was about to humiliate us both. Todd was already pulling out his phone, probably trying to Google how much the Bordeaux room cost, so he could calculate exactly how much I was about to waste trying to impress people who'd never respect me anyway. But here's what none of them understood. I wasn't trying to impress them. I was setting the stage, and the main act was about to begin. The walk to the back of Le Chateau Noir felt like the longest and shortest journey of my life simultaneously. Marcus led me through the main dining room, past tables full of people pretending not to stare while absolutely staring, their conversations pausing mid-sentence as we glided by. I could practically feel their curiosity burning holes in my back. Who was this guy in the decent but not designer suit commanding a private suite like he owned the place? Little did they know I basically did. The Bordeaux room was tucked away behind a set of mahogany doors that looked like they'd been imported from a French castle, which they probably had been because rich people love nothing more than eating dinner surrounded by things that used to belong to dead aristocrats. Marcus pushed them open with a flourish, and I had to admit, even knowing what to expect, the room was impressive as hell. Pure elegance didn't even begin to cover it. The walls were this deep, rich mahogany that gleamed under the soft lighting from actual crystal chandeliers. Not the fake ones you get at Home Depot, but the real deal that probably required their own insurance policy. The chairs were upholstered in burgundy velvet that looked like it cost more per square inch than my first apartment's entire security deposit. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, the kind of instrumental music that made you feel sophisticated even if you were just sitting there eating chicken nuggets. The table could easily seat 20, set with china so delicate you could probably read a newspaper through it if you held it up to the light. Each place setting had more forks than any human should reasonably need for a single meal, arranged in some mysterious order that I'm sure made sense to people who went to finishing school, but looked like a weird puzzle to normal folks. Before Marcus could launch into his prepared speech about the room's features, Eduardo appeared from a side door like a magic trick. Eduardo Martinez was the restaurant manager and, more importantly, one of my favorite people in the entire hospitality industry. We'd worked together back when I was still climbing the corporate ladder, back when I was analyzing acquisition targets, and he was running operations at a boutique hotel we'd purchased. When Meridian acquired Le Chateau Noir, I'd personally called him and offered him the manager position. Best decision I'd made in months. He was grinning at me now with that knowing look that said he'd already heard about the pasta incident and was absolutely living for whatever was about to happen next. "Mason," he said warmly, pulling me into one of those half-hug, half-handshake things that guys do when they're actually friends but don't want to seem too emotional about it. "I heard you were dining with us tonight. Why didn't you call ahead? I would have prepared something special." "You mean something more special than cold leftover pasta?" I asked, and his grin widened into something that looked almost feral. "I heard about that," Eduardo said, his accent making even his disgust sound elegant. "Maria in the kitchen is personally offended. She's been cursing in Spanish for the last 10 minutes about the disrespect of serving garbage to guests." He paused, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Though she was very pleased when she heard you were moving everyone to the Bordeaux room. She's already planning the menu. I think she wants to make a statement." "Let her," I said. "In fact, encourage her. I want this meal to be memorable." Eduardo's expression shifted into something more serious, though the amusement never quite left his eyes. "Same tab as usual?" he asked quietly, and I knew what he was really asking. We had several billing structures at Le Chateau Noir: personal accounts, corporate accounts, investment accounts. Each one sent the bill to different places, showed up on different ledgers. "Exactly," I confirmed. "Bill it to the parent company, Meridian Holdings. I want this one on the official books." He nodded, understanding immediately. This wasn't just dinner. This was a statement, a line in the sand, a receipt for everyone at that table to remember. "Consider it done," Eduardo said. "And Mason, thank you. This is the most entertainment I've had all month. The staff is already placing bets on how your in-laws are going to react when they realize what's happening." "What's the current spread?" I asked, because I couldn't resist. "Maria thinks at least 2 people will cry. Jorge, the sous chef, bet someone throws a drink. I personally think your mother-in-law might actually short-circuit and start speaking in tongues." We both laughed, and for a moment I felt lighter than I had in months. This was what I'd been missing, people who actually got it, who understood that sometimes you need to make a dramatic gesture not because you're petty, but because you're done being treated like you're worthless. "I should get back out there," I said. "Don't want them thinking I'm negotiating a payment plan." "Go," Eduardo said, making a shooing motion. "And Mason, enjoy this. You've earned it." I walked back through those mahogany doors feeling like a completely different person than the one who'd entered 30 minutes ago. The main dining room conversations had resumed, but I could still feel the eyes on me, the curiosity, the speculation. Let them wonder. Let them all wonder. My in-laws were exactly where I'd left them, though now they were in full gossip mode. Their heads were huddled together like they were planning a heist or trying to figure out if I'd had a psychotic break. The conversation died the second I came into view, everyone straightening up and trying to look casual, like they hadn't just been dissecting my financial situation and mental stability. I walked back to my seat slowly, savoring every second of their uncomfortable silence. Zara was chewing on her bottom lip, something she only did when she was genuinely worried. Good. She should be worried. Just as I reached the table, Zara couldn't help herself. She never could. "He's probably asking if they accept coupons," she said to Bianca, loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough that she could pretend she didn't mean for me to. Classic Zara. Cowardly cruelty disguised as jokes. I didn't sit down. Instead, I picked up my water glass and clinked it again, commanding their attention one more time. Every single person at that table looked up at me, and I let the moment stretch out just long enough to make them squirm. "Dinner's on me, everyone," I announced, my voice carrying across the restaurant. Other tables were definitely listening now. "The staff will move us to the private suite shortly. My wife says I should sit with the kids." I paused, letting Zara's face turn an interesting shade of pink. "So let's make sure the grown-ups can actually see what good parenting looks like when you stop underestimating people. Even Marcus, standing a respectful distance away with a tray, couldn't quite hide his smirk. Matilda's mouth opened and closed like a fish trying to understand calculus. Dean looked confused, which was his default setting anyway. Todd was frantically Googling something on his phone, probably trying to calculate if this was real or some elaborate prank. But it was Bianca's face that I enjoyed most. That confident smirk had vanished completely, replaced by something that looked almost like fear, like she was just starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she'd been underestimating the wrong person. "Shall we?" I gestured toward the mahogany doors, every inch the gracious host they'd never believed I could be. The show was just getting started. Moving a party of 15 people from one dining area to another in a high-end restaurant is apparently choreographed like a military operation, and watching my in-laws try to maintain their dignity during the transition was better than anything Netflix could have streamed. They shuffled through the restaurant like a parade of confused peacocks, trying to look like they'd totally expected this turn of events, while also clearly having no idea what the hell was happening or how I was pulling it off. Matilda led the procession with her chin held so high she was practically looking at the ceiling, determined to act like private dining rooms were something she did every Tuesday. Dean kept looking around like he was trying to figure out if this was all an elaborate prank show, and cameras were about to pop out from behind the wine racks. Todd had his phone out, probably cross-referencing Le Chateau Noir's prices with his mental calculation of my supposed bank account, and coming up with an error message. But Zara? My darling wife was doing this thing where she smiled at other diners as we passed, like she was graciously accepting their invisible applause, while simultaneously shooting me these confused looks that screamed, "What is happening, and how are you affording this? And please don't embarrass me more than you already have." Too late for that last one, sweetheart. Once everyone was settled into the Bordeaux room, and I mean settled, because it took Matilda approximately 10 minutes to decide which seat gave her the best angle to be photographed for Instagram, the real magic began. Eduardo had outdone himself. The man understood assignment at a molecular level. The doors swung open, and a parade of servers emerged like they were presenting the crown jewels to royalty. And honestly, considering what this meal was about to cost, we might as well have been eating actual jewels. Each server moved with that synchronized precision you only get from people who've been trained to treat food like it's a religious experience. The first course arrived on plates that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. We're talking about appetizers that looked like tiny edible sculptures, seared scallops arranged like flower petals, some kind of foam that I'm pretty sure was made from champagne and dreams, garnishes so delicate they looked like they'd been placed by a surgeon with OCD. The kind of food that makes you almost feel guilty eating it because it's too pretty to destroy. Then came the main event. If the steaks they'd been eating in the main dining room were impressive, these were legendary. Maria had clearly taken my request for memorable and translated it to make them weep with joy and also regret. Each cut was easily twice the size of what they'd been served earlier, cooked to absolute perfection, with a crust that looked like it had been seared by the actual sun. They were plated with roasted vegetables that had probably been individually interviewed before being selected, and some kind of sauce that the server described in French that I didn't understand, but sounded expensive as hell. The wine, oh man, the wine. The sommelier brought out bottles that didn't have prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. We're talking vintages older than some of the people at the table, wines that had been aging in cellars in France since before I was born, just waiting for this exact moment to make my in-laws question everything they thought they knew about their broke son-in-law. Bianca's face was absolutely priceless. Her eyes had gone so wide I was worried they might actually fall out of her head and roll across the table. She was gawking at her plate like it had just performed a magic trick, her mouth slightly open in this expression of shock and awe that I wished I could have captured on video and made my phone's wallpaper. This is Michelin level, she stammered, and I noticed her hands were actually shaking slightly as she picked up her fork. The confidence, the smugness, the casual cruelty, all of it had evaporated like water on a hot pan. "Mason, how did you? Where did you?" "Connections," I said simply, cutting into my own steak with the casual ease of someone who definitely had not been served leftover pasta an hour ago. The meat was so tender it practically melted under my knife. "You could say I've got a few. You know how it is in my line of work. You meet people, build relationships, do favors. Eventually, those favors get returned. I took a bite and made a show of savoring it, because petty is an art form and I was painting a masterpiece. This is incredible. Maria really outdid herself. That's the head chef, by the way. We go way back. She takes it personally when guests aren't treated properly, so when I told her about the pasta situation, well, let's just say she wanted to make a statement about proper hospitality. The table had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. This wasn't the smug silence of people enjoying watching someone squirm. This was the uncomfortable silence of people realizing they might have severely miscalculated something important. Zara was doing that thing where she tried to recover social situations through sheer force of will. She leaned toward me, her voice low but still carrying because the woman had never mastered the concept of an actual whisper. You didn't have to show off like this, Mason. It's a bit much, don't you think? I turned to her slowly, fork poised midair, and smiled. God, I was getting good at that smile. The one that looked friendly but had teeth behind it. I'm not showing off, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear because if she couldn't whisper properly, neither would I. I'm just upgrading the table. You know, the one you said I didn't belong at? Turns out I can set a pretty good table myself when I'm not being served leftovers like a stray dog someone felt sorry for. You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you could have heard a pin thinking about dropping, deciding against it, and then leaving to find a less awkward room to drop in. Matilda looked like she was trying to solve a complex equation in her head, and all the numbers kept turning into question marks. Dean had stopped eating entirely, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, a piece of perfectly cooked beef just hanging there while his brain tried to process this new reality. But the best part, the absolute cherry on top of this satisfaction sundae, was the kids' table. Yeah, there were actually kids at this dinner, Zara's cousin's children who'd been relegated to a smaller table in the corner because children under 12 apparently couldn't be trusted around Matilda's birthday celebration. They'd been served chicken fingers and fries, which honestly seemed like the better deal until now. When the servers brought out dessert, my moment of true victory arrived. Chocolate lava cake, the real deal, where the chocolate literally flows out like volcanic glory when you cut into it. Each cake was topped with gold leaf because Eduardo had apparently decided to go full dramatic, served with vanilla bean ice cream that was probably made from beans handpicked by monks in Madagascar or something equally ridiculous. The kids absolutely lost their minds. I heard one of them, little Sophie, I think her name was, actually squeal with delight. They'd been stuck eating basic kids' menu food while the adults feasted, and now they were getting the royal treatment. I caught Eduardo's eye and nodded toward the kids' table. He understood immediately, the beautiful man. Within minutes, servers were bringing identical lava cakes to the children, complete with extra ice cream and sparklers that made the whole thing look like a birthday cake explosion. The kids erupted in cheers. Actual, genuine, joyful cheers. Sophie started chanting, "Uncle Mason! Uncle Mason!" Even though she barely knew me, and the other kids joined in like I'd just announced they were all going to Disneyland. I walked over to their table, grabbed one of the dessert plates, and brought it back to my nephew Tyler, the only one of Zara's relatives under 18 who'd ever been nice to me. The kid was 8 and had once told me my Honda Civic was actually pretty cool because it looks like a spaceship if you squint. Here, champ, I said, sliding the plate in front of him. Always remember, don't ever treat anyone like leftovers. People remember that stuff. And when you grow up, be the kind of person who shares the good dessert. Tyler looked up at me with chocolate already smeared on his face and grinned. Uncle Mason, you're so funny. I winked at him. No, buddy, I'm fed up. There's a difference. When I turned back to the adult table, every single person was staring at me like I'd just performed a miracle or possibly committed a crime. It was hard to tell which they found more disturbing, that I could afford this, that I'd orchestrated it so perfectly, or that the children liked me more than they liked any of them. Probably all three. Dessert was winding down, chocolate smears on plates like abstract art, and I could see the adults at the table starting to do that mental math people do when an expensive meal is coming to an end. You know the look, that subtle anxiety that creeps across faces when everyone's trying to figure out how to split a bill that probably costs more than a used car. Except tonight. There was an added layer of confusion because nobody could quite figure out how I was planning to pay for any of this. Todd kept glancing at his watch, then at me, then back at his watch, like the time display might suddenly reveal my secret. Dean was doing this thing where he pretended to be relaxed, but his leg was bouncing under the table hard enough that I could feel the vibrations. Even Matilda, who prided herself on never showing weakness or concern, had this tiny crease between her eyebrows that suggested her brain was working overtime, trying to solve the puzzle of how her loser son-in-law had just dropped what was probably a 5-figure dinner tab without breaking a sweat. Bianca had been unusually quiet for the last 20 minutes, which was alarming because the woman normally couldn't go 20 seconds without reminding everyone in a 5-mile radius about her business acumen or her luxury lifestyle or whatever new accomplishment she'd invented that day. She kept staring at her wine glass like it held the answers to life's greatest mysteries, occasionally glancing up at me with this expression that I can only describe as dawning horror mixed with confusion. Zara, sitting next to me, was doing her absolute best to maintain composure, but I could see the cracks forming. She kept smoothing down her dress, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years, and every few minutes she'd lean over like she was going to say something to me, then think better of it and retreat back to her seat. The woman was dying to ask me what was happening, but her pride wouldn't let her admit that she had no idea what her own husband was capable of. That's when Eduardo appeared, moving through the room with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from managing high-end establishments where discretion is literally part of the job description. He was carrying a leather portfolio, the kind fancy restaurants used to present checks, because apparently regular paper isn't sophisticated enough when you're charging people the GDP of a small country for a meal. He approached the table with a professional smile, and I watched as everyone tensed up simultaneously. It was like watching a group of deer realize they'd wandered into a hunter's convention. Matilda, because she physically couldn't help herself, immediately reached for the portfolio. Her perfectly manicured hand extended across the table with the kind of entitlement that suggested she'd never been told no in her entire life and wasn't about to start now. I'm pretty sure she wanted to see the damage, wanted to calculate exactly how much I'd just spent, wanted ammunition for future family gatherings where she could tell everyone about the time Mason tried to impress them all and probably went into crippling debt doing it. But Eduardo, bless his professionally trained soul, smoothly intercepted her reach with the grace of a matador dodging a bull. He shifted the portfolio just slightly to the left, still smiling that polite smile that somehow conveyed, "Nice try, but absolutely not," without saying a word. "Already cleared by the corporate account, ma'am," Eduardo said, his voice carrying that particular tone of finality that good service industry people perfect over years of dealing with entitled customers. "No signature required. Everything's been handled." The table went so quiet you could have heard a mouse sneeze in the kitchen 3 rooms away. Matilda's hand froze in midair, her fingers still slightly curled from her attempted grab. She looked at Eduardo like he'd just spoken ancient Sumerian. "Corporate what?" Zara's head whipped toward me so fast I'm surprised she didn't get whiplash. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open, and I could practically see the gears in her brain grinding to a halt as they tried to process this new information. "Corporate account," she repeated, her voice climbing half an octave. "What corporate account? Mason, what is he talking about?" I took my time responding. Picked up my wine glass, the really nice wine, the kind that costs more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month, and swirled it slowly, watching the liquid catch the light from the chandelier above us. I let the moment stretch out like taffy, savoring every second of their collective confusion and mounting panic. "Oh," I said finally, as if I'd just remembered something mildly interesting rather than dropping a bomb that was about to crater their entire perception of reality. "That's the best part, actually. See, Le Chateau Noir, this restaurant where we're currently sitting, enjoying this lovely meal, is managed by a hospitality firm. Meridian Holdings, to be specific." I paused for effect, took a sip of wine. "Perfect." Maria really knew her stuff. "And Meridian Holdings," I continued, "recently expanded its portfolio. Acquisitions, you know how it goes. Buying up businesses, restructuring them, improving operations. Standard private equity stuff. Really boring, actually, unless you're into that kind of thing." Dean was nodding along like he understood, which was hilarious because the man probably thought private equity was something you kept in a safe. "Anyway," I said, setting down my glass with a gentle clink, One of our recent acquisitions was Royal Events Catering. The temperature in the room dropped about 40 degrees. Bianca's wine glass slipped from her fingers. Not dramatically. She caught it before it shattered. But the fumble was there, visible, a crack in her usually perfect composure. The color drained from her face so fast I was momentarily concerned she might actually pass out. She started, her voice barely above a whisper. That's my company's biggest supplier. Used to be. I corrected gently, like I was helping her with a minor factual error rather than basically announcing the end of her business as she knew it. Used to be your biggest supplier. See, when we took over Royal Events, we did what any responsible financial institution does. We conducted a thorough audit of all their accounts. Due diligence. Standard procedure. Todd had gone completely still, his fork hovering in the air like it had forgotten its purpose in life. His face had taken on this grayish tinge that suggested his fancy Rolex wasn't helping him tell time anymore, just marking the seconds until his wife's business empire collapsed. And during that audit, I continued, because I was on a roll and there was no stopping this train now, we found some interesting discrepancies. Accounting irregularities, if you want to use the technical term. Unpaid invoices stretching back months. Creative bookkeeping. The kind of thing that makes CFOs very nervous and lawyers very excited. Bianca made this sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a whimper, somewhere in between. Her husband had set down his fork entirely now and was gripping the edge of the table like he was on a boat in rough seas. Now, normally, I said, leaning back in my chair with the casual ease of someone who absolutely held all the cards, we'd work with vendors to sort out these issues. Payment plans, restructuring, that kind of thing. But given the extent of the, let's call them creative accounting practices, and the total amount owed, which I believe is somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000, we've had to make some difficult business decisions. $200,000. I let that number hang in the air like smoke. Matilda's mouth had fallen completely open. She was staring at Bianca with an expression that combined horror, disappointment, and the dawning realization that her daughter's successful luxury catering business was actually a house of cards held together with unpaid invoices and pure delusion. You, Matilda started, then stopped. Started again. You sabotaged your own family? Your own sister-in-law? What kind of monster? I didn't sabotage anyone. I interrupted, my voice still calm, still pleasant, still absolutely done with their nonsense. Bianca sabotaged herself when she decided to run a business on credit she couldn't pay back. I just stopped enabling it. There's a difference. I turned to Bianca directly, and for a moment I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered the pasta, and the years of condescension, and the casual cruelty disguised as family bonding. You spent 3 years treating me like I didn't understand business, I said quietly. Like I was just some boring accountant who couldn't possibly comprehend your entrepreneurial genius. But here's the thing, Bianca, I understand business perfectly. I understand it well enough to know that what you were doing wasn't business at all. It was a very expensive fantasy funded by other people's money. The silence that followed was deafening. If silence could shatter glass, the Bordeaux room would have looked like a crime scene. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the soft jazz playing in the background seemed to get quieter, like the music itself was uncomfortable being a witness to this family's complete implosion. It was the kind of silence that comes right before something catastrophic happens, a tsunami, an earthquake, or in this case, my wife losing her absolute mind. Zara's voice cut through the quiet like a chainsaw through butter. You're petty, she hissed, and I do mean hissed, like she'd transformed into some kind of angry snake that wore designer clothes and had a credit score hanging on by a thread. Her face had gone from pale to red so fast I was genuinely concerned about her blood pressure. This is the most petty, vindictive, absolutely insane thing you've ever done, Mason. What is wrong with you? I turned to look at my wife, the woman I'd married 3 years ago when I still believed love could conquer family dysfunction and basic human decency, and I felt nothing but tired amusement. Not anger. Not hurt. Just this profound sense of clarity that comes when you finally stop pretending everything's fine when it's very clearly not. Correction, I said, holding up one finger like a professor making an important point. I'm professionally petty. There's a difference. Regular petty is slashing someone's tires or posting vague Facebook statuses. Professional petty is using legitimate business practices and legal financial instruments to prove a point while maintaining complete ethical integrity. It's petty with paperwork, if you will. Dean, who'd been silent through most of this disaster, suddenly found his voice. You can't just destroy someone's business because your feelings got hurt over dinner. That's psychotic. Feelings. I laughed, and even I was surprised by how genuine it sounded. Dean, buddy, this has nothing to do with feelings. This is about basic financial responsibility and the natural consequences of poor business decisions. Bianca's company has been operating in the red for months, possibly years. She's been using Royal Events' credit line like her personal piggy bank, ordering supplies she couldn't pay for, and hoping nobody would notice or care. That's not feelings, that's fraud. Bianca finally found enough oxygen to speak, though her voice came out strangled and desperate. You don't understand. The business needed time to grow. I was building something. You can't just pull the rug out from under. Actually, I can, I interrupted, reaching into my jacket pocket. And I brought receipts. Literally. From my inside pocket, I pulled out a folder. Manila. Boring. The kind of folder that accountants and lawyers use when they're about to ruin your whole day. I prepared it this morning, printed everything out at the office, organized it with little tabs and everything, because if you're going to destroy someone's financial security, you might as well be thorough about it. I slid the folder across the table toward Bianca with the casual ease of someone passing the salt. It stopped right in front of her plate, which still had half a chocolate lava cake on it. The dessert seemed obscene now, a monument to excess in the face of impending financial ruin. Go ahead, I said. Open it. I think you'll find it very educational. Bianca's hands were shaking as she reached for the folder. Todd leaned in close, his face already pale, probably running calculations in his head about how this was going to affect their lifestyle, their social standing, his precious watch collection. The folder contained everything. And I mean everything. Copies of invoices with overdue stamped in red across them. Spreadsheets showing months of unpaid bills. Email correspondence between Royal Events and Bianca's company, getting progressively more desperate as the debt mounted. Bank statements, redacted appropriately, because I'm not a complete monster, showing negative balances and bounced checks. A summary of her debt that I'd personally compiled, broken down by category, with charts and graphs because presentation matters. The crown jewel, though, was the list of contracts. Current clients that Royal Events supplied for, including several major ones that had clauses requiring vendors to maintain certain financial standards. Contracts that would be null and void once those clients found out about the debt situation, including, and this was my favorite part, the Vanderbilt wedding she'd been bragging about all night. Bianca's face went through about 17 different colors as she flipped through the pages, none of them healthy. Todd had one hand over his mouth like he was physically trying to keep himself from throwing up. The Vanderbilt wedding, Bianca whispered, her fingers stopping on that particular page. You can't, they signed a contract. With Royal Events as your primary supplier, I confirmed. And Royal Events' new ownership has decided, after reviewing the outstanding debt and the account history, that we can no longer extend credit to your company. Which means you can't fulfill that contract. Which means, if I'm reading the fine print correctly, you're liable for breach of contract. That's going to be expensive, though probably not as expensive as the $200,000 you already owe. Her hand flew to her mouth. A sob escaped, quickly stifled, but it was there. Real tears started forming in her eyes, and part of me, a very small part that still remembered when she used to be almost nice to me before she decided I wasn't worth basic human respect, almost felt guilty. Almost. You might want to review all of that before your accountant does. I continued, my voice still maddeningly calm. Oh wait. I paused for dramatic effect, because I'd earned this moment. He works for me now. Small world, isn't it? Jerry came over to Meridian Holdings about 2 months ago. Better benefits package, better salary, and he gets to work on actual professional accounts instead of trying to make your creative mathematics look legitimate on paper. That did it. Bianca made this sound that was half sob, half scream, pushed back from the table with enough force that her chair screeched against the floor, and basically fled from the room. Todd scrambled after her, nearly tripping over his own feet, his multiple Rolexes jangling like some kind of expensive wind chimes marking the rhythm of their exit. The silence that followed their departure was somehow even worse than before. Matilda had been watching this entire exchange with increasing horror, her perfectly composed face finally cracking to show actual emotion underneath. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her hands gripping her napkin so hard her knuckles had gone white. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold enough to flash freeze nitrogen. "You ruined her," she said, each word precise and sharp as a scalpel. "You deliberately, systematically ruined your own family member. Your wife's sister. Over what? Hurt feelings? Wounded pride? A plate of pasta?" I looked at Matilda, really looked at her, and saw exactly what I'd been dealing with for 3 years. A woman so convinced of her own superiority, so certain that her family's wealth and status made them untouchable, that she couldn't comprehend the basic concept of consequences. "I didn't ruin Bianca," I said, and my voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Bianca ruined herself by running a fraudulent business operation and treating people like they were beneath her. I just stopped paying for her mistakes. There's a difference." "Semantics." Matilda spat. "You're destroying this family." "No," I countered, standing up slowly, deliberately. "I'm just refusing to be the foundation you all stand on while you kick me. You can't build an empire on someone's back and then act surprised when they eventually stand up." Zara grabbed my arm, her nails digging in through my jacket sleeve. Her face was a mess of emotions. Anger, confusion, fear, and something that might have been realization finally dawning. "Mason, stop. Just stop. You've made your point, okay? You're not the poor loser we all thought you were. Congratulations. Can we go home and talk about this like adults?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. "Like adults." I repeated slowly. "Zara, adults don't serve their family members leftover pasta while everyone else eats steak. Adults don't mock their spouses in public. Adults don't spend 3 years treating someone like they're lucky to be tolerated instead of loved." I gently removed her hand from my arm. "You wanted to see what I was capable of," I said quietly. "You wanted to know if I had any backbone, any power, anything that made me worth respecting. Well, now you know. I bought the table you tried to push me away from. And you know what the really sad part is? I didn't do any of this because I wanted to hurt you. I did it because I was tired of letting you hurt me." Dean found his voice again, though it came out weak and uncertain. "So what now? You're just going to bankrupt Bianca and walk away? Destroy the family and act like you're the victim?" "The family destroyed itself," I said, sliding a business card across the table toward him. "This is the contact information for Meridian Holdings' restructuring department. If Bianca wants to work out a payment plan, if she wants to actually run her business legitimately instead of like a Ponzi scheme with canapes, she can call them. They'll help her. That's what we do. We fix broken businesses. But she has to actually want to fix it, and she has to stop pretending that debt doesn't count if you smile pretty and know the right people." I looked around the table one last time. At Matilda, still clutching her napkin like a life preserver. At Dean, looking lost and confused. At Zara, tears finally starting to stream down her carefully made-up face. At the empty seats where Bianca and Todd had been. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said. "The meal's paid for. The wine's excellent. And unlike some people, I actually tip well, so the staff will take good care of you." Then I adjusted my tie, nodded to Eduardo, who'd been standing in the corner watching this entire disaster unfold with the fascinated horror of someone watching a nature documentary about predators, and walked toward the door. I didn't get far before Eduardo caught up with me in the hallway, just outside the Bordeaux room where my former family, and yeah, I was already thinking of them in past tense, was probably having a collective meltdown over their creme brulee. The man was grinning like he'd just witnessed the greatest performance of his life, which, to be fair, he probably had. "That," Eduardo said, clasping his hands together, "was magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. The staff is going to be talking about this for years. Maria is literally in the kitchen right now saying she wants to name a dish after you. I think she's calling it The Reckoning, and it's going to involve very expensive ingredients and a side of justified spite." I couldn't help but laugh. Real laughter, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest when tension finally releases after being wound tight for way too long. "Tell Maria she's a genius and I love her. Also, make sure everyone who worked tonight gets a bonus. They earned it dealing with that circus." "Already done," Eduardo confirmed. I added 20% to the corporate tab under Staff Appreciation. "Consider it handled." He paused, his expression shifting to something more serious. You okay, though? That was intense. Even for family drama, that was next level. Was I okay? Honestly, I felt better than I had in 3 years. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying around this massive weight made of other people's expectations and judgments, and I'd finally just set it down and walked away. My shoulders didn't hurt anymore. My jaw wasn't clenched. I could actually breathe without feeling like I was suffocating on swallowed words and suppressed anger. I'm good, I said, and meant it. Really good, actually. Better than good. I feel like I just got paroled from a prison sentence I didn't deserve in the first place. Eduardo nodded, understanding in his eyes. You need anything else tonight? A drink? A quiet place to decompress? A getaway car? I'm good, I assured him. But I should probably check on the kids before I head out. Make sure they're not traumatized by all the adult drama happening around them. They're in the private garden area, Eduardo said, gesturing down a side hallway. We moved them there after dessert so they could run around without bothering other guests. Fair warning, though, they're completely sugar high from all that chocolate lava cake. It's like a tiny tornado convention out there. Perfect. Kids hopped up on premium chocolate sounded way better than dealing with adults having emotional breakdowns over their own bad decisions. The garden area was one of Le Chateau Noir's hidden gems, a courtyard tucked behind the main building, strung with fairy lights, and filled with the kind of elegant landscaping that cost more to maintain than most people's cars. It was quieter out here, peaceful, just the sound of water from a fountain and kids laughing as they chased each other around like caffeinated butterflies. Tyler spotted me first. The kid's face lit up like I'd just announced Christmas was happening twice this year, and he came running over with chocolate still smeared on his face and his dress shirt somehow already untucked despite the dinner ending only 20 minutes ago. Uncle Mason, he shouted, because 8-year-olds only have one volume setting and it's loud enough to alert neighboring counties. That was the best dessert ever. Did you see how the chocolate just exploded out when you cut it? It was like a volcano, a delicious volcano. I knelt down to his level, grinning at his enthusiasm. Pretty cool, right? Better than chicken fingers. So much better, Tyler confirmed solemnly, like he was delivering testimony in court. Uncle Mason, are you magic? Because my mom said you couldn't afford nice things, but then you got us all that amazing food, and now I'm confused about who's telling the truth. Out of the mouths of babes, as they say, kids have this brutal honesty that adults spend years learning to suppress. They just say what they're thinking, consequences be damned. Not magic, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. Just good at my job. And here's a secret. I leaned in like I was sharing classified information. When people tell you that you can't do something, sometimes they're really just telling you about their own limitations, not yours. You remember that, okay? Tyler nodded seriously, processing this wisdom with the gravity it deserved. Then his face split into another chocolate-smeared grin. My mom says you made Aunt Bianca cry. Did you really? Oh boy. Of course the kids had heard about that. In families like this, drama traveled faster than sound. Your Aunt Bianca got some news about her business that she wasn't happy about? I said carefully, trying to navigate the minefield of explaining adult consequences to a child. Sometimes when you run a company, you have to make hard decisions. And sometimes those decisions make people sad. But that doesn't mean they're wrong decisions. My dad says you're mean, Tyler continued, because apparently we were just airing all the family laundry now. But I don't think you're mean. I mean, people don't give kids extra dessert. You gave me extra dessert. That makes you nice. Simple logic. Beautiful, uncomplicated, 8-year-old logic that cut through all the corporate speak and family politics and just got to the heart of things. I'd shown kindness to the kids, therefore I wasn't the villain. If only the adults could think that clearly. Thanks, champ, I said, genuinely touched. You're a good kid. Don't ever let anyone treat you like you don't matter, okay? And definitely don't ever treat other people like they don't matter. That's the important part. Because everyone matters? Tyler asked. Exactly. Everyone matters. Even the boring accountants. Tyler laughed like I'd told the funniest joke in the world, then ran off to rejoin his cousins who were trying to catch fireflies near the fountain. I stood up, brushing off my knees, and that's when I heard her voice behind me. That was quite a speech. Zara. Of course. The woman had radar for dramatic moments she could insert herself into. I turned around slowly. She was standing in the garden doorway, still in her designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, mascara slightly smeared from crying, looking both furious and lost at the same time. Her arms were crossed defensively, but her posture was all wrong. Slumped shoulders, uncertain stance. This wasn't the confident woman who'd mocked me an hour ago. This was someone whose entire worldview had just been forcibly rearranged. "We need to talk," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Do we?" I asked, not unkindly, just genuinely curious about what she thought there was left to say. "Mason, you destroyed my sister's business. You humiliated my entire family. You made my mother look foolish in front of everyone. And you did it all so coldly, so calculated, like you'd been planning this for months." 6 months, actually. I corrected, because accuracy matters. "Well, technically 3 years if you count all the times I took notes on how your family treated me and decided that eventually there would be consequences." "This isn't you," Zara insisted, taking a step closer. "The Mason I married wouldn't do something like this. He wouldn't be this cruel, this vindictive." I looked at my wife who'd sat there and watched her sister serve me leftover pasta, who'd told me I should sit at the kids' table, who'd spent 3 years allowing her family to treat me like I was lucky they tolerated my existence, and I felt a profound sense of sadness mixed with relief. "You're right," I said quietly. "The Mason you married wouldn't have done this. But that Mason doesn't exist anymore. You know why? Because that Mason kept thinking that if he just stayed quiet enough, worked hard enough, proved himself enough, eventually your family would see his worth. That Mason was an idiot. So you planned this whole revenge scheme? Over what, pasta? Hurt pride. Over basic human dignity," I corrected. "Over 3 years of being treated like I was worthless. Over watching you sit there time and time again and say nothing while your family mocked me. Over being served leftovers at a birthday dinner like I was a stray dog they were doing a favor by feeding. It wasn't about the pasta, Zara. It was about what the pasta represented, your entire family's contempt for me, and your complicity in it." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Opened it again. I didn't think it was that bad." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't think it was bad at all. You thought it was normal. Acceptable. Just how your family is. But here's the thing about being someone's partner. You're supposed to have their back. You're supposed to defend them. You're supposed to make it clear that disrespecting your spouse isn't acceptable, even if it's coming from your own family. Especially if it's coming from your own family." Zara's eyes filled with tears again, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of genuine remorse or just tears of someone upset that their comfortable situation had been disrupted. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small. I thought about that question. Really thought about it. What had happened now? Did I go home to our apartment and pretend this dinner hadn't been a turning point? Did I try to rebuild a marriage that might have been built on shaky ground from the start? Did I give her another chance to prove she could choose me over her family's toxic dynamics? "Honestly," I said, "I don't know. But I know that I'm done apologizing for existing. I'm done making myself smaller so other people can feel bigger. I'm done being the joke at family dinners. If you can't respect me, if your family can't respect me, then maybe we need to rethink what we're doing here." Before she could respond, Tyler came running back over, completely oblivious to the heavy conversation happening. "Uncle Mason, Sophie says fireflies aren't actually made of fire, but I think she's wrong. Can you tell her?" I smiled at him, grateful for the interruption. "Sophie's right, buddy. They're bioluminescent. It's a chemical reaction, not actual fire. Way cooler than fire, actually, because it doesn't burn anything." "Whoa." Tyler breathed, his mind appropriately blown. I turned back to Zara one last time. "You know what the real difference is between your family and me? They think you can order respect from a menu, that it comes automatically with money and status and the right last name. But respect? You can't buy it. You can't inherit it. You have to earn it. And sweetheart," I paused, letting the word hang there with all its bitter irony, "your family never earned mine." Then I reached into my wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and handed it to Tyler. "Take all your cousins for ice cream on the way home, okay? The real good stuff. Life's too short for cheap dessert." I walked past Zara, past the fairy lights and the fountain, past the expensive landscaping and the illusion of perfection that places like this tried so hard to maintain. Eduardo was waiting by the front entrance with my coat and a knowing smile. "Heading out?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, shrugging into my jacket. "I think my work here is done. The tab's all settled." Tipped the staff generously too, just like you asked. Perfect. I paused at the door, looking back one last time at Le Chateau Noir, at the restaurant that had been the stage for probably the most satisfying dinner of my life. Thanks for everything tonight, Eduardo. Seriously. Anytime, he said. And Mason, that family of yours, they never deserved you. I stepped out into the cool night air, pulling out my phone to call an Uber, and smiled. He was right. They never did.